Oh, Panzer of the Lake, give me your wisdom. What was that? What? I should have built you right the first time! Ouch. Hey everyone, this is John from ausf.D, and I'm here to welcome you to a brand new episode of Old Tank Repair. In this video, the vehicle getting the rebuild treatment is this 1/35th scale vintage Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D medium tank. Like with the other models in the OTR lineup, this model here was built by myself many years ago, and over the years fell into a bad state of disrepair, so it was time to give this thing a nice little rebuild and facelift. In this video, I'm going to be taking you, the viewer, along throughout the entire process, starting with the model's original condition, and taking you along throughout the duration of the restoration process from start to finish. In this video, I'm going to be showing many of the techniques that I utilize to build my models, as well as polish up and rebuild many of my older models, and all that's going to be seen and mentioned and discussed in great detail. Because of that, this video is going to be a tad bit longer compared to my usual standard content, but either way, this is the type of thing you want to pace yourself with watching, or you can hit that little gear in the corner to speed it up at times. Either way, I hope you enjoy, and just sit back and enjoy the video. But before I get started, as I always mention in these videos, the model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that will be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. And with that out of the way, let's kick this video off. And here's the model at the start of the rebuild. Like I said before, this model is a vintage Tamiya 1/35th scale Panzer IV ausf.D. Just like with the other models in the OTR lineup, this one here is another one of my youth builds, and I built this model back in the wee age of 13 years old, so if I was to put a date, I'd say I built it back in 1998, maybe 1999, around thereabouts. This model doesn't have any sort of compelling or interesting origin story or background story like many of the other models I've mentioned before in the OTR lineup. This one here was just a standard summer Saturday purchase and build. The model was procured from my favorite hobby shop, which is Trains and Lanes Hobbies out in Easton, PA. Quick little shout out. My father and I went there early one Saturday morning, for one reason or another. I went to the tank aisle, as I always am compelled to do. Went to the aisle that had all the Tamiya kits. I saw this one here, loved the box art, thought, hey, that's a cool addition down to my collection. The price wasn't overly egregious or nothing. I picked it up for about, I don't know, 20, maybe 25 bucks max. Rung up at the counter, took the model home, and instantly began it, and the model was basically finished. I believe that's Sunday. These Tamiya kits are just well renowned for going together extremely quickly. If the thing wasn't painted the same day, it was definitely painted the next day. Regardless, the model was quickly built to the configuration that we have here, painted in the following format, and after that it literally spent the next 21, maybe 22 some odd years in the same exact location in my book display case. And that is why it is in the following condition that we see here. And there's really nothing more of significance to mention outside of that. This model is also in far better condition compared to some of the other models that I brought onto this table that are in the OTR lineup. Where in comparison, those other ones are like falling apart, missing pieces, the build was horribly botched, the hatches are glued on wrong, all that good stuff. For this one here, that's not really the case. This one is, for the most part, intact, or at least at first glance. Who knows, once the project commences. But from what I see here, it seems to be all there, more or less. On a similar note, this takes to the paintwork. And again, this is where the model is in much better condition compared to some of the other models that I brought to this table that are in the OTR lineup. The model was actually built pretty well, or I should say, built as well as 13-year-old John possibly could have with the tools and with the skill levels that I had of the period. The entire model is thoroughly painted with Tamiya acrylics. The base coat is the only coat of paint on it. Is Tamiya Panzer Gray. It was applied via our single action Poshy airbrush. The weathering was also what was used during this era. The edging was all done with rust paint, and this was applied again with the single action airbrush. The rust paint color is exterior latex. The model was also thoroughly washed, or is what we would refer to as a wash these days. At the time, we called it weathering black, which consisted of acrylic flat black that was heavily diluted with water, and then the entire unit is airbrushed or brushed on with a paintbrush, but this one I used the airbrush for. And basically, when the paint gets washed on, it settles into the corners and crevasses, and it just highlights it, basically much along the lines of Tamiya panel line accent does today. So, you know, more things change, more things stay the same, I suppose. Another weathering technique this one does have is a technique from WWII, where I would dry brush light gray onto the edges of certain objects, and it gives it more of a highlight. This was, again, something that was done during this period. As nice as the model was built at the time, it definitely does have some mistakes in it. Some of which would glare out right at me at quick glance, one of which would be the motorization hole right over here. Of course, the Tamiya, old school Tamiya Panzer IV kits were originally made to be motorized, and because of that, there is that little square found in that section. I tried to plug it up with some green putty of the era, but as you can see, I did a pretty terrible job with that. It's kind of chunky, clunky, and you can still see the hole there, or the remnants of the hole, so it was a total failure. And this side didn't fare much better. The other thing I noticed quickly about the build is, again, the paintwork. The weathering is just not something that held up with age, and I definitely could do a better job, you know, second time around. The markings are also okay, they're not terrible. The entire model, like I said before, was painted with the Tamiya acrylics, but then after the markings were added, the entire model was sprayed with a coat of Tester's Model Master Dull Coat, which was a material that I used for a very long period of time. It wasn't until recently when I decided to put that out to pasture and replace it with the VMS matte varnish. But these markings over here are held on with the Dull Coat. And Dull Coat, at the time, did have several benefits. One would be for decal adhesion. It would do a good job with sealing it to the model, much along the lines as varnish does. And when you have complex items like this here, Dull Coat had this habit on sucking the decals into details, and it just made them look a little bit better. Unfortunately, it worked out better in some areas than others. Like we see here, the cross is a bit of a mess. The 4 over here, a little bit choppy, but that's actually something that can be worked with and then be forgiven because, you know, paint chips and all that stuff, you can work it into the weathering. But, you know, it could be better, shall we say. Of course, the model's exterior is completely caked over in layers of dust as well as fungus. The dust is that thin, silty type dust that I always warn you all about. If you have models, this is definitely the type of dust that will screw you and do you in. Dust on a model really comes in 2 flavors. You have the pillowy dust, and then you have the silty dust. The pillowy dust is pretty bad in its own right. This is generally found on a model or on any object that you leave in an open air environment, on a shelf, on your TV stand, whatever, and you leave it there for an extended period of time. That stuff is terrible, and that actually grows on top of this stuff. Really bad. Not good at all. It's like that felt blankety stuff. It's crap, right? But another dust that's equally, if not worse, is the silty stuff. And this is the silent killer because this is the type of dust that will grow in so-called dust-free environments. So if you have the Detolf bookcase or that display case, it's really, really popular amongst model guys and collectibles, and also if you do action figures, really collectible. There's a ton on YouTube and you see tutorials on them. Those cabinets will get dusty. They are not dust proof. Even the dust proof tutorials I've seen will fail and you will still have dust on the inside of those. This model over here, along with the other OTRs, were in a bookshelf type setting, and the bookshelf was one of those ones that are sold in the big box stores, where you have these doors that open and swivel out of the way, and it has glass pane in front, and they look like they're awesome. I'll throw a picture of one onto screen to know exactly what not to buy. So those cabinets, again, at a quick glance, oh, these are great. They keep the models dust proof, and I could see them, and it's snake oil because, one, they're really small. I would fill them up really, really quickly, you know, even though my dad was like, oh, get them, they're really good. No, they're not, but, you know, regardless. On top of that, they let dust in. You have large gaps on the sides and the top, and dust will flow in, or the dust mites will be able to get in there and then grow on your model. And this is the type, and even if you try to dustproof those, you're going to have the same problem with the Detolf. It just doesn't work. And this is the type of dust that you can't wash off. If you try to wash it off, one, a lot of times the water beads off the surface, which is kind of funny when you see that. It blows your mind. But the second thing is that what's even worse is that the water will actually liquefy the dust, and the dust will become a wash. And it'll actually go into the crevices on the model, making it look even worse. So this stuff is really, really, really bad. It's awful. On top of that, this one here was in a dark enclave in the shop, and the bookshelf themselves are dark. They're not lighted. There's no glass outside the one from the front, so it's mostly just boxed in, and it's dark almost all the time. You mix that with 20 plus years in my damp basement workshop, and you're gonna get fungus like we see right there growing on the hatch. We have a whole colony right there, a whole petri dish of penicillin of one flavor or another. We've got some cobwebs back here. Again, this was in a case. This was in a case, and look at it. Look at this. Terrible. Never, 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 never buy those cabinets. They're absolutely abysmal. They're the worst ever. Save your money. Don't get those. And if you're watching this, and this is one of your first times watching these videos, thanks for joining us. But the second thing is you're saying, well, John, where am I going to put my models? I need to keep them displayed, and I want to keep them dust-free. How do you go about doing it? Simple. Right out of the stack, right now, here's one of my 135s. This is the subject matter of its own model showcase video, but regardless, this is how I display my models. These clear plastic boxes over here are, so far, hands down, the champ of keeping your small-scale models dust-free for years. These boxes here are sold in Hobby Lobby, but I'm pretty sure you could find similar found online. And the advantage about them is twofold. First, they're really easy to find. They're also fairly affordable when found, but on top of that, they come in different sizes and are stackable. So you can pile these things up to the ceiling if desired. And looking over into my display cabinet, or my display area, looks like I'm well on my way to that. But on top of that, since they come in different sizes, you can fit any multitude of models inside. Very rarely do I encounter a 135 where I can't fit it inside one of the many sizes that these boxes do come in. Also, if you look at this one over here, you'll see the top has some dust growing on it. Look at that, and that's that silty crap that I was talking about before. But the fellow on the inside, completely dust-free, and has been now for at least a year or so. So, like I mentioned before, these are de facto the best ways to display and to preserve your smaller scale builds. The only thing, though, that I have to stress about these is, you'll see what I did here with the cardboard. You'll notice that the model is sitting on a little piece of cardboard. And the reason for that is because, one, it reflects more light and makes it look prettier, but on top of that, it's actually for a very important reason. One small side effect that these cases do have is that they have a chemical reaction with the vinyl found in rubber tires, as well as also single piece tracks. If you have the model just sitting onto the base over here, what will eventually happen is that the tracks will actually start melting into the plastic. So much so that when you try to remove the model, it will actually be stuck to the base, and you actually have to like peel it off like Velcro. And that is if you catch it. If you leave it for an extended period of time, it will actually cause some serious detrimental effects to the tracks, and you could potentially damage them, if not destroy them outright. So that is definitely something you want to avoid. Best way to avoid that? Just a piece of paper. That's it. The most low-tech possible way you could think of. Take a piece of paper or some cardboard, cut it to the shape, put the model on top of it, and you'll never, ever have to worry about the thing melting ever, as long as time goes on. And by the way, I actually have proof of this I want to show you on the table for anyone who thinks I'm capping or anything like that. Right here, I have another one out of one of my other collections, which is my 1/32 scale vintage dinky SEKZ 251 half track with the Pack 40. Bought this thing about 25 years ago now, off of eBay. But regardless, this model has been sitting in this case now literally since I bought it. And originally, it did not have this cardboard thing in place, and the model was sitting on the surface, like you see here, on display for about a year or so. Well, one day I went to take it out to, play with it, and it went... And there you can see the outcome right there. You see those marks found in the plastic? Those right there are sections of the track pads trying to melt their way into the clear plastic. After I saw that, I instantly went, cut up this piece of cardboard that we have here, put the model on top of it. It's been sitting on there ever since, and not once have I ever had to worry about the tracks melting into the plastic. Years later, I saw the same exact thing happen with one of my 135s where I had it in the case for about a year or so, went to move it around, and I noticed the same thing happening. I'm like, uh-oh, this is a reoccurring problem. So since that moment onward, I basically recycled the technique that I first stumbled into back in like the year 2001. And since then, all my models that are in these type of boxes are protected with the floor with just a simple piece of cardboard and or paper. So if you're going with one of these boxes, can't stress enough, just putting a little piece of paper down, trust me, you'll thank me in the long run. So with that out of the way, you could basically see why I want to go ahead and give this one a thorough rebuild. And you may be watching this and saying to yourself, okay, John, that's all well and good, but don't you have any others in your old youth collection that are in really bad shape that can use the upgrade as well? And the answer is yes, sadly I do. Matter of fact, many of this guy's shelf mates are future candidates of the OTR treatment, and as time goes on they will be getting the treatment as well. But another reason why I chose this one over some of those other examples is this should be a relatively easy and fast build, okay? After the last OTR, which was the Tamiya 1990s era Stug 3 OTR, that one was a very in-depth project, and after finally getting that one completed, I'm like, I need an easy one. So this one here looks to be something that should be fairly easy. However, looks can be definitely deceiving, and I've had builds where, oh yeah, it's going to be cake, and next thing I know, it's an entire thing, and I have to replace everything, I have to mold new parts, make 3D printed ones, and the build continues. But regardless, this one here looks like it should be one of the easiest and quickest, knocking on wood, OTRs that I've had in quite a while. So we'll go ahead and see how that goes. As for quick examination, again, the model is built totally stock. I'm not seeing anything broken. The tracks are held together with some staples, which was a common trick back in the day. In fact, to me, on their older kits suggest that if you have trouble pinning the tracks together. I'm not sure if these ones are actually hot glued in, or I'm sorry, heat melted in place. Doesn't look like they are. Nope, it doesn't look like they are, so that's good. I should just bend the staples out of the way and the tracks should just come apart, which will make the rebuild all that much more easier, just like on the Stalin. And I could just go ahead and simply repaint them. Just like on all of my other builds, the tracks are painted with Rattle Can flat black spray paint, so the denatured alcohol is definitely not going to have any effect on that, but the denatured alcohol is definitely going to obliterate the remaining of the painted surfaces. Another thing I'm looking for are those stupid Dremel tick marks that were a plague on my older builds. And this one here does have them, but fortunately they appear to be very few and far between. I see some right here on the front armor plate. Those little dumbass tick marks. I did add some weld texturing to this whole front plate over here, but the welding actually doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty neat and concise and should clean up very well, as like I've done on a few of the other OTRs. The upper hull looks like it's finally giving way. I'm not sure if I glued that on originally or if I made it come apart. Let's see. Yeah, I see some glue marks here. Doesn't look like I really glued it that much. The exhaust manifold does have some seam works to deal with. It's 2/2 assembly, and there's always a seam that's there. Probably slathered it with Testor's Red Tube, as I always do. Oh, also, it's that obligatory time to mention, Testor's Red Tube was used on this, and never use Testor's Red Tube model glue. It's a terrible glue. It's chunky, it's clunky, it kills brain cells. It's basically awful at just about everything but killing brain cells. There are far better glues out there. Red Tube should not be one of them. As you can see, and just like you've seen on all the other OTR models, the models tend to just fall apart on you after they get a certain age. So unless you build a model anticipating to do a rebuild on it 20 years later, just use some better cement. Me personally, I like to roll with super glue. In my opinion, it holds and ages the best of all the glue choices that are out there, but you know, your results may vary. Just whatever you use, don't use Tesser's red tube. For the love of God, don't use Tesser's red tube. And with the model opened up, I could definitely smell the lovely aroma of whatever fungus that is, so that's definitely not healthy, so I'm going to go ahead and seal it back up. And I will definitely have the last laugh once this one here makes the Panzer of the Lake treatment and gets dunked in denatured alcohol. And on that note, there's nothing really much to discuss right here. Time to bounce over to the shop and get this guy ready for the dunk. With the model back in the shop, first thing I need to do is the teardown. Obviously, all the little tools and smaller bits of equipment need to be popped off because generally these will, one, get in the way when the model gets submerged, and on top of that, they're just going to break off when I go over with the rough bristle brush. So, with everything being glued on with Tesser's red tube, it shouldn't be too hard to go ahead and carefully and surgically remove these components. See? Everything is okay. The tools themselves are painted actually not that badly, and I think I might actually just work around them with the original paint that's on them. We'll see how that pans out. Because I do see some of them have some sections of sprue still on them. That needs to be deburred, which means you have to touch it up, and basically you have to repaint at that point, but regardless. So the tools all came off relatively intact. I did have a loss with the one hook over here, but that's something I can easily replace. Okay, so with that removed, it's now time to remove the track and the running gear. So now that the tank looks like it was parked in downtown Newark, it's time to get the thing ready for the dunk. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the running gear and I'm going to put them into their little securing bell. This is something that I just cobbled together a few minutes ago. Basically a Dixie cup with a bunch of small holes drilled into it. The last one I had was pretty good, but it was slightly on the smaller end. And if you have a lot of suspension parts, especially bigger parts, you know, they tend to fill up pretty quickly. So revise the design a little bit. We just grab some rubber bands and seal this guy off. Okay. For the finer bits, like the tools and all the other things that came off, I have here my little cage, my cleaning cage, which I picked up off of Amazon a little while ago, and it works really well for this stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the tools in here. Okay, so that's been taken care of. The tracks will also get the dunk, even though it's not going to take off any of the paint on the surface. The tracks do need to be cleaned off because they have that same crap and crud on them that are found on the rest of the vehicle. I just want to, you know, thoroughly cauterize everything. So these two will be getting the dunk as well. And at this point here, it's time to weigh down the model. Plastic models like to float, and in order for the solution to work best, the tank does need to be thoroughly submerged for a period of time. So the best way to do that is to weigh it down. That should be enough. One more for good measure. Okay, that thing should be more than weighed down to keep this thing from floating. Alright, time to get the start of the show. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper OTR video if I didn't have everyone's favorite cast member make its appearance, which is the bucket of denatured alcohol. And that means it's time for everyone's favorite court-ordered safety briefing. Yes, I'm well aware of that, yes. Denatured alcohol is a serious substance, so you want to take the proper safety precautions when dealing with this substance. You note I am wearing gloves. Well, I usually do that in these videos, but I definitely wear gloves when dealing with this stuff because I don't want this crap on my hands. The fumes are hazardous, so you want to be in a well-ventilated area, and you definitely do not want to do something stupid with the fumes. And on the topic of doing something stupid, no, do not drink this at all. Terrible, bad idea. Don't do it, it's poison. Just don't be an idiot. Do not do that, okay? The last thing, and most certainly noteworthy thing to mention, is this is fuel. The vapors are very flammable, so do not smoke anywhere near this stuff. Bad things will happen. Bottom line, don't be a horse's ass, and the stuff will be just fine with your future endeavors. So with that nonsense out of the way, let's go ahead and crack this thing open and get the model ready for the dunk. Alright, here we go. It's time for this guy here to become the Panzer of the bucket. Taking the dunk in 3, 2, 1. Alright, time for the other accessories. Okay, with all that taken care of, it's time to seal the bucket up and set it aside in a nice kick-free area of the shop so that I can let nature take its course. Well, this thing has been soaking for definitely long enough. Not for any particular strategic reason, just because, well, I've been busy. So, I think I have some time to squeeze in to go ahead and begin the paint stripping process. Alright, no need to say anything any further. Let me mask up, start the music, and begin stripping the paint. with a little bit of elbow grease, the model was thoroughly stripped down. With the paint removed, we could get a better look at the condition of the model underneath. So the two things that really stood out to me was first the turret. We have here a bit of rough sanding in this section. This is something that's very easily going to be polished away. We have those stupid tick marks I mentioned before, but fortunately they're very thin and sparse, specifically compared to some of the other models that I've run on this video series in the past, so that's going to be also cleaned up pretty well. The weld actually doesn't look too bad, but I am going to also polish that down a little bit. We have a few glue marks here or there on the hatch. You know, quite typical for someone of a youth build. Back here we have some seams. Looks like I just did my classic trick where I just smeared on a nice layer of red tube Elmers, or sorry, red tube testers, and I just left it in that format and I just painted over it. It's funny, I actually kind of did the trick before because I didn't really notice it in the other section of the video, but this is something that's going to easily be dealt with. Cupola's got some seam work also to contend with. Glue marks aren't too bad. There's some sections of sprue, or remnants of sprue where this thing was connected. I didn't properly deburr that, so that's going to be taken care of. That's what we saw on the turret. On the hull, not too bad. There were some casualties, as one would imagine when you're doing a paint strip. The MG barrel popped off, as did, I believe, one of the headlights right over here. I should be able to track both of those down in the solution right now as soon as all this sediment settles, so I could play Jacques Cousteau and go ahead and fish the pieces out, but for the time being, not too bad. The remainder of the work here is, again, pretty clean. There's really not a whole lot going on this model in terms of damage or mistakes or things along those lines. It should, again, be a fairly straightforward rebuild. The most amount of work I can see is definitely on the lower hull. We have, with the paint removed, you can see those sections in much better light. There's a lot of stuff going on over here. We have the divot clear as day, and we also have some attempts of bodywork, which appear to be some glue smeared on, and also looks like I brushed on some black paint in order to, I guess, help conceal it. That didn't work out too well, so this is something that's going to be addressed. This side here, it looks like it's even worse. We have a nice little glob here of glue, and that needs to be polished down. And then, you know, fortunately, this is all customarily done, and it's also work that's fairly straightforward, so we should deal with that. Everything else seems to be okay. I'm not seeing any egregious glue marks or anything like that outside of the ones I just mentioned. I was able to pop off the exhaust manifold. This was not properly installed when I built it all those years ago, which was a good thing too that it popped off because I had to do some seam removal. Again, I just did my smear trick like I referenced before, but this just gives me the first layer in order to start with the polishing. But the other reason why I yanked it off was because of the piece not being properly installed at that time. It was kind of installed in a half-cock way, so it was kind of like just sitting there with the piece barely hanging on. Fortunately, old glues being what they are, I was able to successfully pop the part off without any issues. I am seeing that I am missing one of these little sled guards over here on this section. That should be in the solution, and we'll see how that pans out momentarily. Worst comes to worst, I'll just make a mold of one. Or I think I might have one left over from the... Yeah, I think I do in the spare parts bin from the Panzer IV with the Schmalterm turret from CMK that I did a while ago. Of course, that was based on an older Tamiya tooling kit, and you do have those parts as leftovers. So that is something that I might have to dig into my spare bin to dig up. Otherwise, I'll just make a mold of one. Wheels, excellent condition. So are the idlers. One slight faux pas I did notice was with one of the sprockets. This one right over here, and the reason why I'm mentioning this because this is a very easy mistake that could be made on one of these kits if you're just going through the motions. When I glued the sprocket halves together, I didn't push it in all the way, and the piece dried slightly cockeyed. Not by much, but slightly. It's to the point where it's not really noticeable. And unfortunately, this is the type of thing where I can't exactly crack it off, you know, the glue seams, because if I was to try to mess with this, you know, what I'm going to do is destroy the sprocket. So I'm going to leave it on this one. Fortunately, it's not in a way that is really that's noticeable, or it's one that can cause concern. The tank is static, so I don't have to worry about the timing being absolutely crucial on every single tooth. So I could just reinstall it exactly the way I had it before, and no one will be the wiser. Well, until now, because I mentioned it. But again, I just want to mention as a cautionary tale, if you are building one of these Panzer IVs, make sure that when you're seating the sprockets, you make sure that they are fully seated and are timed properly. So that's something that is done by simply taking your time and making sure everything is set appropriately. So on the tools over here, they survived very well. Nothing really much to mention there that I already mentioned before. As for the tracks, as we saw, the tracks, I was able to disassemble them. When I built this model all those years ago, I did not heat melt the tabs over here, and I just simply stapled them in place, which was a fantastic move on my part, because it now makes the repaint work and the reassembly that much easier. So I just simply bent the staples out of the way, as you saw, and the pieces just opened up. When I'm going through the rebuild process, or I should say the final assembly process, I'll take you along on how to properly assemble and melt one of these sections together. Not to mention also make sure that they are held on in the appropriate manner, but that's definitely more information on that is to come. So to start, I'm going to just work my way from the bottom up, which means the lower hull is the #1 place. It's going to be ground zero on where I'm going to start this project. So let's go ahead and pick up to where I'm dealing with the bodywork. picked up where I left off, polished it down with a little bit more red putty, some super glue, and some wet sanding, and here are the end results. This will definitely blend in much better after the model gets its base coat. If you are working on one of these models for the first time around, be sure to address this before the suspension goes on. It definitely makes the job much easier. Also at this time, you'll notice that I went ahead and drilled a hole into the transmission sections over here. Pay no attention to that. I had an idea to do something. Didn't work out, so I'm just going to go ahead and just have a steel shaft running across for the sprockets. On the rear section, you can see I've already been reworking this area over here, cleaning up the sections where the excessive glue was remaining, and I also drilled out the tow hitch section here with a pin vise. Currently, I'm finishing up the bodywork on the exhaust manifold. The seam work has been taken care of. There was some extra glue slathered on these sections of here when I first built the model for the same purpose, so I just, again, picked up where I left off. The sanding was done with a needle file, some sandpaper, and a bit of patience. I went ahead and drilled out the exhaust manifold itself just to give it a little bit of extra detailing. And from here, I'm actually going to go ahead and give this guy a shot of primer just so I make sure that there are no hidden surprises after the piece has a coat of paint on it. This, of course, leads us to the upper hull. Shall we say there are some revisions that are going to need to be taken care of. The first are with some sections on the under sponsons over here. We have several little injection pin marks, and this is something I like to take care of with some bodywork, sand away with some putty, making it nice and smooth. It's not necessary, but it's one of those things that I personally like to do. It just makes me feel a little bit better about the build. The other thing is a little bit more substantial, and that is the replacement of the sponsons. As you see, there are no sponsons found on this model over here, and this is always something that bugs me. I always like to take care of. I have some techniques to take care of that, and I'm going to be doing momentarily. I'm going to be doing that after the body work is concluded on the pins. But the very first thing I'm going to do is going to be taking care of something topside. So on the section over here, I may have mentioned before, but I made a few mistakes. First, with the antenna channel, it's glued in the wrong location. There's that. The second thing, and it's also a bit more substantial, is that the armor that we have on the section over here, which of course is an applicate armor, which is a neat feature found on this older kit, is glued upside down. So yeah, that was something I didn't pay attention to when I was younger. If I hold the piece up in the light, you should see a little circle popping up right over here. Well, that little circle is supposed to be right there, and that's the indication point for the pivoting antenna base. And this is something that I'm going to have to obviously take care of. Trying to salvage the armor, not going to happen. It's going to be a complete loss. But fortunately, I have another brand new runner on hand from another Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D kit that I'm currently in the process of finishing up. That one, I'm building it without the armor sections present. So I have literally an entire runner of brand new mint in box, or I should say fresh tooling, armor segments that would be a perfect replacement for the one that we have here. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. I have to go ahead and amputate this carefully without causing any collateral damage, and we'll see how that pans out. But the biggest thing I wanted to address is potentially saving the antenna channel, because I don't have any of these on hand, and I really don't feel like fabricating one or possibly just making one in 3D print. Obviously, if push comes to shove and that's the situation I have, you know, I'm going to get ahead and 3D print it, but we'll see if I could potentially save it. It's not looking really good. It's hard to say, but hopefully old glue being what it is, it'll give me a bit of a hand. So good news was I was able to carefully remove the antenna channel. That should be able to be polished up and recycled. And now I'm able to just remove the remainder of the armor section here. This is very similar to what was seen on the Stug 3 OTR video that I recently completed and posted on YouTube, where I had a similar situation, but it was with that applicant armor found on the front, and that one required a bit of finesse with removing and polishing away. This one is very similar, but it's also going to be a bit trickier because unlike the other one where it was on the front plate, I have full access to go in there with files and other sorts of equipment. On this one here, it's a bit trickier because we have the side skirt integrally molded on. So we're going to have to carefully move around that. And to do that, I have here the Dremel, or in this case, a Black & Decker RTX, and I have a 1/8 inch RotoZip router bit. Been using these things forever. This is basically just a bigger version of the smaller ones that I've mentioned and shown on the videos in the past. What I'm going to do, it's going to require a very steady hand, and I need to just go and make a few passes here, basically like a handheld, well, milling machine. Removing just a little bit of material after each pass, making sure it's nice and steady, nice and flat. And this is a very, very risky procedure, and it's one that should only be done by someone that has a lot of experience. So we'll see if I'll be able to make this work. Alright, well, that was awesome. So I was able to carefully and surgically remove the armor that was the problem. The cut was absolutely flat. Basically, no collateral damage was exhibited. It was a nearly perfect procedure. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and just carefully sand this area down just to make sure there are no shards or any sorts of chunks of glue left on the surface. And from here, we could go ahead and continue further. There was a little bit of glue on this section here of the armor. On the front one, this one's just going to be carefully polished down, because obviously this one is being salvaged, it's being kept. I'm actually surprised it turned out as good and as easily as it did, because I was kind of expecting it to be a bit of a problem, but no, that's not the case. Worked out absolutely perfectly. Alright, I think that should be enough sanding. Okay, so from here, before I can actually start remounting on the new panel, what I am going to do is take care of a quirk found on the old school Tamiya kit, and that's with this notch that we have right here. This is something I mentioned in the other videos, but one thing that's weird about the kit is that there's this notch that's integrally molded into the upper hull molding. This is probably a carryover or an appendix from some other bit of equipment from another Panzer IV kit, and it just, for one reason or another, stayed on the tooling. However, this is something that's not present on the real unit, so it needs to be filled in. To fill this in, you can't just put a glob of putty on there, it's just too big for that. So the best way to do is to take a chunk of Plastrock, fit into this section over here, glue it in place, and then just work around it with the bodywork. So as you can see, the new chunk of plastic was fitted in place. Also, you'll notice I oversize it. This is something that I always do, and I always advocate when you're doing a procedure like this. It's best to oversize something, because then you can sand and polish around it. It's whittling it down to where it'll be the appropriate size. This is better than trying to either get it right on the first try or making it underscale, and then you're going to have to make up with that with more bodywork. So this is just generally the way I like to do things. The next thing I'm going to do now is add the red putty to the bottom sections over here. To do that, I have my tube of red putty. By the way, Amazon link in the video description. And to apply it, I have here my little spatula. This is something that can be found in any art supply store. And it's used for basically sculpting clay and or working with paint. From here, though, I'm going to use it for application of some putty. The reason why I like this is because it is surgical. Now, you don't want to plug up all the holes. Some of the holes are needed because you need to put the tools back in place. The ones I'm going to be addressing are basically these shallow pin marks that we have right here, as well as these deep injection pin marks here, here, and here. The reason why I'm using this tool is because of this lip here that we have on the tin work. You don't want to get putty encrusted on that section. So this can be used in order to smear the putty only where it needs to go, and you don't have extra buildup where you don't want it, like so. If you have a little chunk like that over there where you don't want it, you can use the X-Acto knife and just scrape it away. Like so. Could also help readjust it onto the spatula, like I just did. For these guys over here, you don't have to worry about them because they are actually concealed and hidden inside of the tank, so that's not something you really have to spend a whole lot of time with the putty. Normally this is much easier done before the pieces are installed and also before these tips are fitted in place, but again, I am working within the confines of the build at hand. Can I get these off, maybe? Oop, well, yeah, I got one off. Let's see if I can get the other one off. Hey, look at that. Thank you, old glue being what it is. That literally was a lifesaver. And this is going to make my job, oh, that much more easier. This guy here looks like he's working himself loose. I'm actually going to glue him on at this time. I don't want there to be any other complications with parts breaking. So I'm just going to put a little drop of super glue here and reattach him. Alright, it's good there's not enough, or I should say there's no gooping on the opposite side. And the glue is only where we need it. I'll put a little bead up here. Perfect. Alright. While the glue sets, I can still do the putty work. And as you guessed, this is again one of those procedures that are easily done without being filmed. It's amazing just how much more complicated it makes things when you're trying to get things on camera. And in true OTR fashion, when I was filming it, trying to get it on camera, I accidentally put a gouge where I didn't want one. So I'm going to have to now address that accordingly. There we go. Gouge has been taken care of. Let's just finish up the last of the putty work here, and then I can set this thing aside and let it dry. This guy still has that spring in place. Not sure if I'm going to keep it or not. I'm on the fence. If I have to replace one, I'm going to replace all 4 of them. So I believe that's probably going to be the best course of action. We'll see what happens as the video goes on. Until then, I'll just carefully work around it. There we go. All right. That's all there is to that. Now it's time to do the best part. Let it thoroughly dry. Jumping forward a little bit, the putty is now drying, so it's time to start sanding. To do this, I'm going to be using several grits of sandpaper. We have here some 150, which is going to take out the bulk of the material, and then I'm going to work my way down to 320 here, and then eventually 400. I'll probably utilize the 400 with wet sanding just to make sure everything is nice and buttery smooth. With that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and start making some dust. After a quick rinse in the sink, getting out as much of the dust as possible, you can see that the underside here looks pretty good. Before I continue with the spots and fabrication, I'm going to go ahead and deal with this little guy over here. I'm going to be utilizing basically the same techniques, but I'm also going to be adding a needle file in just to get rid of the majority of the bulk. So let's go ahead and get to it. So that looks pretty good. Fortunately, because it's going to be played over the armor, I don't have to go crazy with making sure that the thing is seamless on this side, but obviously on the top side, I am going to have to pay a little bit more attention to making sure everything is as seamless as possible. Okay, that is very smooth now with all the wet sanding. Also, hit the side a little bit more just to make it a little bit more polished compared to before. And I think this one here is good to go. One thing that I do is that whenever I'm doing any sort of body work, I actually have this trick where I look up to the ceiling where I have my shop lights, and I basically shine the model at a certain way into the light. It's kind of hard to get on camera, so I'm not really going to be able to do it, although I did mention this and show it in another OTR video, which was the Jagd Panther video that I did a little while ago. But in that video, I mentioned if you hold the unit up and you hold it up just right, you can see the light just gleam off of the surface, and there it will reflect or it will highlight any sort of imperfection. So if you have a little mound of material that's still left, or if you have some cavities or craters that are left on the part, those will show up too. Obviously, the best way to determine if your bodywork was successful or not is to add a little bit of paint on this section over here, and once it dries, you will instantly know where you stand. But from what I saw from the light trick, it seems like the bodywork here was concluded and I could progress further. This guy here taken care of, it's now time to focus back to the underside. Before I can go ahead and get the upper and lower hulls back together, I need to go ahead and address the missing sections of sponson. One thing that I've mentioned on many of my videos is that for some reason the sponsons are absent on a large number of kits out there, and specifically kits from Tamiya during this era. And even though you can just build the model just fine without the sponsons, and most people do, this is something I always like to correct because it just makes the model seem much more solid, whole, and more complete in my opinion. In several of my videos, I mention exactly how I fabricate the sponsons, and this one here is going to be no exception. By the way, in case anyone's wondering, I actually mention and show the following steps in another Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D video that is posted on the channel, or at least it should be by the time this video drops. Otherwise, looks like I just did a massive spoiler. Back to this one over here, I'm going to use the exact same technique, and that's going to consist of some masking tape and a pencil, or at least that's what I need to do that at first. To do the technique, I'm going to go ahead and take some masking tape, which you can see right over here, and I'm going to go ahead and line it up on the bottom portion here of the tank. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this line over here, and I'm just going to make it as straight as possible, connecting it to this location. This is something that's more easily done off camera, so I'll go ahead and take care of that for you guys. There we go. Just going to go ahead and, with my fingernail here, just press it up against the little ridge, make sure it's as flat as possible. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the opposite side. Technically, you could actually make just one of these templates and it'll work just fine, but just for the sake of doing it, I'm going to go ahead and make two of them. There we have it. Once the tape is added to the boat locations, it's then time to actually mark where the new material is going to be. To do this, I'm going to take my pencil over here and I'm going to use the sharpened flat side to scribe up and down these sections, and this will reveal the high spots, and now you'll know exactly where the sections of the hull line up. Just like so. Once that's taken care of, you could go ahead and remove the tape. And then I'm going to go ahead and transfer it over onto some sections of sheet styrene or some styrene strip. Either way will work just fine. I do have some evergreen plastic strip around here. One moment, please. And here's the plastic right here. This plastic is perfect because it is literally the exact width required in order to fill in the widest point of the sponson. I just need to figure out exactly where to make the cuts for the front section. So I'm going to go ahead and take the tape over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and line it up. Hopefully this pops up on camera, but you can see the leading edge right here. You can see exactly where the section cuts in and goes straight again. And this is more than enough for me to go ahead and make the appropriate incisions. I'll go ahead and make a snip right over here. Like so. This guy could set aside. And I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing with the other one. Like I stated before, technically you can use the exact same sticker, or what effectively is now a sticker on the template for both of them. But if you wanted to just save a little time, you can go ahead and do it this way. There we have it. Trim this guy off. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and just cut and remove the material with the tape in place, and it's going to act as a temporary stencil. To do the incision on this one, I'm going to go ahead and use a Dremel with a cutting stone. And this will allow me to go ahead and make the incisions required to go ahead and remove the material. Like everything in life, there's more than one way to do the same trick. In fact, I think I showed it a slightly different way on the other video. But for this one here, we're going to roll with this method. Okay. Go ahead and line this guy up. Looks like I need to make a few more extra cuts. After a little bit of cutting, the only thing I got to do is just do some slight little hand-fitting tweaks here and there. And as you can see, the piece will just fit right in without any sort of issues. Here we have the two segments, and I can just simply CA them to the appropriate locations and call it a day. However, to make the job a little bit easier, I went ahead and snipped some sections of plastic angle, which are going to be glued on the leading edges over here, and this will help with the alignment, and it'll also give a broader area for the glues to adhere to, making for a stronger bond. Once the angle sections are glued on, the piece looks like this. At this point here, we're ready for the installation onto the model itself. So I'm going to go ahead and add a bead of glue on the flat sections, as well as also to the leading edge of the strip itself. Not a whole lot, obviously you don't want to go nuts with it, just a small little bead on all of the appropriate surfaces. Then you just want to press the piece in place. Where it needs to go. You want it to have it as flush with the surface of the tin work as possible, because this is going to come to help later on when it comes time for fitting to the upper and the lower. Otherwise you will have a seam that remains, and then you're going to have to do a little bit more extra super glue in order to get the seam deleted. But something like that should do the trick. This point here, just set it aside and let it dry. Once that happens, I'll go ahead and do the installation on the opposite side. With the sponsons fitted in place, I am going to go ahead and add just a little bead of glue here, bridging the two gaps together. and also forcing the glue into these sections just to give it just a little bit more strength. I am going to go ahead and polish it or hit it with some wet sanding after the super glue sets. On this one though, I'm not going to go ahead and sand it as thoroughly or add any putty to making sure everything here is blended seamless because, well, remember on the real vehicle, this section here is part of the armored hull, while this part here is the tin work which would be fastened to it, and so this is exactly basically what it would look like on the real one if you didn't have the tin work in place. So deleting the seam here is actually not something that you want to do. But I do want to make sure that, again, the glue is set, and the smear is just to give the piece a little bit of extra rigidity. After the CA is polished over with some wet sanding, at this point here, the upper is ready for remounting to the lower. I also went ahead and remounted on the tin work end sections, found these two sections here. These are the original ones. I just cleaned them up, polishing down any sort of glue chunks or remnants that remained, and then they were just remounted in the appropriate locations. Obviously, there's nothing more that needs to be mentioned over here, so let's go ahead and remount these sections. I am going to add a little bit of glue on the inner tab here. The unit, of course, was originally meant to be motorized, and because of that, there were actually two other mounts that are located in the front section over here. These were not installed when I first built the model. If you are building it static, you don't have to install those components in place. In fact, they're not even in the instructions on how they even get fitted. It's just one of those appendix things, and if anyone has ever built one of the older Tamiya pattern Panzer IV tanks, you'll see these sections on the sprue and wonder, you know, what the hell are these for? But rest assured, that's what they're intended for use for. You would glue them into the section over here, and then there are two other tabs found on the front, and it will just basically puzzle fit and clip in the back. Again, not really relevant for this guy over here. Gonna add some glue to the appropriate locations. Not a whole lot. You don't want to have too much glue because then it could goop onto the sponsons. Then you have to do a little bit more putty work, or I should say sanding work. So, you know, you don't really need to have that much. With the glue added, I'm just going to go ahead and line this guy up. And that's all there is to that. As you can see, with the sponsons in place, it really fills in this area very, very nicely. And also with the sponsons, it gives more surface area for the lower to adhere to the top, again making it for a stronger, more solid build. The one spot where I did not add any glue was on the front plate over here. That's because I am going to add glue, but it's going to be with the more runny, thin super glue, which will go into that little seam over there in a better way compared to the thicker stuff, which can plug it up. Once the stuff goes into the appropriate location, it just seeps right in, and this stuff basically dries almost on contact. With the upper and lower hulls now one piece, it's time to start fleshing out the remainder of the hull details. First place I'm going to start with is the rear section. As you can see, it's pretty empty back here, and almost everything was gutted out during the teardown. Well, let's go ahead and reverse that. First thing I'm going to install is going to be the exhaust manifold. Here you can see what it looks like in its complete format. The putty work, or I should say the seam removal work, has been completed. Any sort of dings, dents, or cuts that were found on the material before have been thoroughly blended in. That was present on both these end sections over here. I guess I nicked them up to add a little bit of denting or character to it. Didn't really look all that great, so I just went ahead and just blended it back in with some thick super glue. I did drill this section out, as I do on these Panzer IV builds. Just makes for a better build in my opinion. And also, just to verify, make sure everything is nice and seamless, the unit was primed in flat black, which, as you can see, did the job just fine. At this point here, this guy's ready for reinstallation. Reinstallation is just going to go, well, like it did originally with the out-of-the-box method. The back is refleshing out very nicely. You can see that the exhaust manifold guards have been refitted in place. These ones here are the new replacement cast resin ones. The original ones didn't really hold up all that well, so they were simply just replaced outright with the new cast resin ones. The next thing I'm going to install is actually this small little auxiliary exhaust that we have right here. But one thing that's really interesting is that it doesn't fit onto the part where it's supposed to. As you can see, it's off slightly right over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and amputate the molded in tailpipe over here and replace it with a piece of wire. That'll give me more control and flexibility in getting the component to fit in place. What's interesting to point out is that I've already done 3 other of these vehicles at this time, and those ones were all able to use the kit parts and they all lined up appropriately. As for why this one's odd man out, your guess is as good as mine. But regardless, let's go ahead and take care of that. While working on the upper hull, I noticed that one of the supports here are missing. These supports are found on the rear section of the tin work right over here, and they are kind of important detail-wise. Because I do not have a mold of one of these parts, I am going to have to go ahead and fabricate. And I could do this one of two ways. I can either go ahead and 3D print one, which I most certainly can, but that's going to take extra time, and honestly I want to get this build out of the way because I have a bunch of other projects lined up. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to buckle up and do it the old-fashioned way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and transfer this over to styrene and recreate the component. However, I'm not going to make one, I'm going to need to make two, because since this piece here is going to have to be scratch built, the original one has to be replaced as well, because this will keep continuity. If I just replace the one, even though it will be almost identical, it will still not be a identical match to the original, and therefore it will stand out like a sore thumb. So when you're doing a procedure like this, you are going to have to go ahead and replace both of them. So the repair on the little exhaust went by without any problems. The wire was bent to shape, and everything was fitted as it should. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of a little bit of bodywork found on these two sections right here and here. During the sanding process, a small little crack popped up in this area here. Remember, these two sections of tin work are two separate parts with a little seam there, and this is something I like to polish down so it looks continuous. This was just done with a little drop of thick super glue. Now that's set, I'm going to go ahead and just sand it down with some sandpaper. Nothing major, just a few passes should be more than enough for the job at hand. Hopefully that comes out on camera, but I can definitely feel it's nice and smooth. Same thing for the one on the opposite side. Alright, excellent. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to fabricate the springs. With the little springs added in place, you really get to see how the model's taking shape. For the springs, this is made out of thin floor wire, and I bent it around a small metal wire. Then I just conformed it to the shape that we see here and glued it to the following locations. This, by the way, is a trick that you can do on any Panzer IV in 1/35 scale in order to bump up the accuracy and just to give it just a little bit extra more flavor. This was a technique that I perfected, when I was like a little kid for reasons just like this. I'll be building a Panzer IV, piece flings off the lost party or breaks during extraction, so sink or swim, I had to learn how to go ahead and fabricate springs. The two on the back have been fitted, as have the two on the front. Once everything is painted and weathered, these are really going to shine, and it's going to make the model look that much more polished. At this point here, I'm going to go ahead and add on the side armor. Like I said before, I have here a whole runner spare from one of these exact kits, and I'm going to go ahead and use the piece that I need. Once the part is cleaned off, it's then time to fit to the model. Remember, I went ahead and thoroughly sanded and made the side as smooth as possible, so the installation should be exactly as it was when the kit was brand new. Also, the other thing to keep in mind, again, I have to stress this plate here can easily be installed upside down, as what transpired on this build, and it caused me to go down the rabbit hole that I've been on this entire time. The appropriate way to have it is in the following format. There's a small little circle that's an indication point right over there, and this is only found on this side, and this should be facing upward, and this is the front of the vehicle. You'll notice that the rivets have a certain layout, and they are asymmetrical, so if you install it upside down, you're screwing the pooch. I'll go ahead and add a little bead of glue to the model's hull. Then drop this fella in place. Just make sure he's lined up laterally as well as vertically. You don't want to have the piece on cockeye. That's not exactly doing you any favors. And then once that's taken care of, the piece is as good as new. Next detailing to add is going to be the antenna well, as well as the antenna base itself. Those are going to be recycled from the old one. As for this sprue over here, well, I'm going to set that aside for the time being. Here we have the antenna well. When I extracted the part was able to be removed relatively clean and mostly intact, but I did lose a chunk of material on this section over here, so this is currently being replaced. Off camera, I went ahead and cleaned the area up, making for a nice 90-degree cut, and this allowed me the perfect location to glue on a small strip of sheet styrene, or I should say styrene strip. This super glue has set, and at this point here, it's ready to be trimmed up and refined further. First thing I'm going to do is trim this guy to shape, and then I could go ahead and with the needle file and some sandpaper, polish it down further to the point where it'll look absolutely seamless and blend in without any sort of problems once everything is painted and weathered. And that looks like it cleaned up very well. At this point here, I'm going to go ahead and glue this guy in place, and when I'm installing him, this is another thing you want to be aware of because you can easily make a mistake. When I first installed this component, I installed it far too much to the front of the vehicle to the point where you're not going to be able to install the antenna base mount. On the unit over here, you want to have it where it's in the format that you see right here, where you have that little gap, it's probably about like a ½ inch gap between the bracket of the mount, or I should say of the channel, as well as the end section here of the armor plate. You do want to have a little bit overhanging into the rear section of the vehicle, and you want to have the top point, or I should say the top portion, butt up against the top row of rivets. At that point there, the piece is at the appropriate location, or at least as per the instructions. If there was ever a part small enough to end up in Lost Partia, it would be this guy. This here is the original antenna base that was supplied with the model. This being an early pattern German vehicle, the antenna bases were actually retractable, which was a really cool feature, and the real ones were made out of like a series of leaf springs. But on the model over here, one thing I do want to mention is that the kit does have this little channel integrally molded in this section here for you to install on a antenna, either be a wire or a stretched out piece of sprue. The channel is a good idea, but it's always a bit too shallow. And one modification I like to make is I like to bore it out deeper with a pin vise with a small bit. Because of this feature, the wire sinks in deeper inside of the component, makes it stronger and less likely to ever pop off. For the bit itself, I'm utilizing the number 72 bit, and it's a 0.0250. That's the size I'm using. I have no idea what that is in metric. However, as I always mention, these bits are available from the vendor listed below in the video description. Hopefully there's a little bit of shards left over from the original wire glued in place. It's okay. This is a tricky procedure to do on a good day, on a fresh one, let alone on one that has been through the ringer, so to speak. With the fresh bit off camera, I was able to drill the hole out, And from here, I'm going to go ahead and install it to the model. Obviously, you're going to want a pair of tweezers or a plier for this here. And yes, this is the type of thing that just loves to fling off to Lost Party, as I touched upon before. Once you add the drop of glue, you just find the suggestion point on the model. Fortunately, you're going to see mostly knuckles, but just drop this guy in place. And there we have it. Once the piece is dropped on, make sure he's lined appropriately. And at that point there, set it aside and let it dry. With the addition of those last parts, the hull at this point here is now ready for painting, which means I could shift gears and focus on the next leg of the build, which is going to be to revise the turret. As a quick recap, you can see what the status or condition of the turret is in with the paint removed. On the back over here, there is a seam found on the rib portion of the turret, and as you can see, I did my typical youthful approach where I just smear a nice thick glob of Tester's red tube on that section and calling it a day. Well, obviously that's something that's going to need to be revised, and this is something I'm just going to pick up exactly where I left off with. Only this time I'm going to go ahead and just sand and polish it down with the sandpaper. The remainder of the turret looks like I hit it with some coarse sandpaper over here for one reason or another, so that's going to be blended and polished away too. There's some glue globs here and there from when the cupola was installed. I yanked the cupola off because it was actually mounted on improperly. Fortunately, that was an easy break. That should be a quick repair. Handles here are busted. I'll probably have to replace them both with wire. The front here, I actually went ahead and sculpted on a weld bead, which is something that I'm probably going to be doing again, but I'm going to be using a more modern technique. This one here looks a bit rough. And it wouldn't be one of these OTR videos if I didn't have those stupid fine-scale modeler cast texturing tick marks found on the surface here of the metal. So fortunately on this one it's much more mitigated compared to some of the other ones I've done in the past. But here there's only like 2 or 3 little ticks on the front. Should be easy enough to patch or to flare in. Same thing would here on the side. I can see 1 or 2. And I think there might be, yep, 1 or 2 on this side as well. So, overall, not too bad. The other thing to mention is with the mantlet, again, this is a multi-piece assembly, and there are some seams to contend with. And I just said, screw you, I'm not going to deal with that. So, yeah, I'm going to have to now take care of this at this point in time. But again, this is something that should polish away fairly easily with some sandpaper. Well, now that you see exactly what I'm up against, let's go ahead and go to the silent portion of the video where you hear some nice copyright-free music, and I'm going to go ahead and address all these issues. As you can see, with a little bit of elbow grease, the surface is polished down very, very well. Those stupid tick marks are gone, blended over. And from this point, I can continue. One thing I am going to do is revise this area right over here. On the real unit, the front section of the mantlet bolts onto the area that we have here. And on the Tamiya kit, this is actually a separate piece of tooling, so you will have a natural seam in this area. However, because of the bodywork and the polishing, the seam kind of got blended away, and this is something I want to re-add. In order to add the cut line on this one, I'm actually going to do is I'm going to saw the unit off, clean it up, and then reinstall it. This will return the natural seam that was originally there. To do this, I'm going to utilize my X-Acto saw over here because the blade is very, very thin, and this is exactly what you want. You want to remove the minimum amount of material as possible, otherwise we'll throw off the look of the piece. It's going to be a little bit tricky to get this on camera. You know what? I'm not going to get on camera because I want this cut to be absolutely straight. So let's cut across when that's already been accomplished. So as it turns out, I didn't have to fully saw the component off. I was fortunately able to just run the saw over the sections, and I was able to find the natural seam line that was there at first, and I was able to then just simply re-etch it. It was a very precise procedure because, again, you have to stay on the money. If you deviate any which way, you can actually ruin the thing, and that's not helping anybody. So I was able to do the job. I did damage the counterweight over here. The part's just simply bent. I can fix that, and I have the other half right here on the table. It's going to be glued on momentarily once all this is cleaned up. But before I can do that, I am going to go ahead and just run some sandpaper on these sections over here just to smooth out the remnants of the cut. Bear with me for one moment, guys. Okay, there. That looks pretty good. Let it get in focus. I am going to go ahead and run an X-Acto through this, though, just to clean out even further. And then, of course, once it gets painted and the panel line accent goes in, yeah, it's really going to make that pop and shine really, really well. All right. With that out of the way, I can now commence with repairing the busted components, such as the counterweight, as well as also remounting on the cupola and fabricating brand new handles. As we saw before, I drilled out the old remnants with a pin vise, and now I can go ahead and fabricate new ones out of the same gauge of metal wire. As you can see, the turret is really taking shape. The cupola was reinstalled. I did have to clean it up a little bit. There was a mistake when I assembled it where the parts weren't properly lined up, and so what I actually have to do is I have to re-etch the little lines that we have right here on these little segments. This was done off camera with the X-Acto saw, and I went ahead and just simply cut into these sections, resculpting them. The original slits, which were off-center, were polished away with some sandpaper. Fortunately, they are really shallow, so they polished away pretty quickly. After the cupola was refitted in place, I went ahead and fabricated the handles right here and here out of some wire, bent them to shape, dropped them in place, and they are good to go. Only one of them broke off. The original one was fine, but again, just like with that strut that I mentioned before on the fender, if you replace one, you're going to have to replace both, so it was a simple swap out job. It's the way you see it here. The front over here, the coax MG was refitted in place. This is the stock one. I just cleaned it up and remounted it. The muzzle section was drilled out with a small pin vise, again, in my usual manner. The A-frame was pretty much repaired. This one here, I'm just waiting for the CA to set so I could just polish it down with some sandpaper. Other than that, that's completed. There is one more bit of detail I'm going to add to this section here, but I'm going to do that after I do the next procedure. You see, on the model here, there would be a weld bead found in this section, as well as on this area over here. However, on this kit of the Panzer IV, whenever you drop the mantle, or I should say the front armor in place, there is a seam to deal with, and you have to polish it down. Well, after you polish it down, some of the collateral damage will be the loss of some of these welds. And as I mentioned in the other videos, once the bodywork is completed, I like to re-add them. In order to re-add them, I'm actually going to use a technique similar to what was done on this build originally when I was a kid, but it's a procedure that's much more involved now, and that is to etch it with a dremel. Here we have the dremel right here. I have one of those small micro bits that I mentioned before, only in this time the bit is broken. The broken bits are great for etching on the welds. You could use a fresh bit for that. However, like I mentioned in another video, the broken bits seem to work pretty well for this. So I kind of keep a few on hand just for this application. To do it, you want to go with low revs on the Dremel. Also, I went ahead and marked the areas here with a pencil. Hopefully they come out on camera once it focuses in. And this is great, so you're not just willy-nilly winging it, and it helps keep everything aligned properly. It's going to be a little tricky to get on camera, if I could even do so. So let's see if I can pull this off without it being a knuckle fest. As you can see, the weld is being sculpted. Kind of get the gist. I am going to go ahead and do the rest off camera just to make sure I don't screw this up. Let's cut across one that's already been completed. After the welds are etched, the next thing I'm going to do is refine it. And to do this, I'm just going to take some sandpaper and roughly, or I should say lightly, go over the areas that I just etched. When you're using the bit, it's going to pull up bits of plastic and it's going to puddle them into sections, and this little puddling here can hurt the look, and it's not really necessary. So to remove it, it's really easily done. Just polish it over with some fine sandpaper like this. And as you can see, once the shards are removed, you can see the weld bead present. It's etched in place, and it's nice and smooth on the surface without any sort of clutter to obstruct it. You don't want to go crazy with it. Obviously, you don't want to undo what you just sculpted. So just a couple passes here or there is more than suffice for the task at hand. If there's little bits of plastic dust left in the surface, you could either use a blowgun to just blow out all the shards, or you can use a rough bristle paintbrush in order to just clean up the inner recesses, like what I'm going to do right now. As you can see, it cleaned it up very well. And the welds are back to where they belong. Just like with the other things I mentioned, once the panel line accent goes in there, it's really going to make it pop. The very last bit of detailing I want to add to the model before paint involves something that was omitted by Tamiya. On this pattern of Panzer IV, it's iconic to have this counterweight A-frame system that we have right here under the barrel. And on the real unit, there's actually a clamp that's found on this section over here, and it wraps around this portion of the tube, and that's what secures it in place. The Tamiya kit gives you the A-frame, however they don't give you the bracket for one reason or another, so this was something that I need to fabricate. To do this, I went ahead and took some soda can aluminum over here, and I went ahead and cut a thin little strip. I'm going to go ahead and bend this around an object that is slightly smaller than this size over here, because then when it comes time to slip it on, it will clasp onto the tube and will require less effort to go ahead and get it to fit. I'm going to go ahead and pinch it around this object. And as you can see, it's starting to take shape. Unfortunately, this piece here I think is actually the same size. Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and find a smaller drill bit or a shaft. Yeah, this should work. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing again. Okay, with this bent, I'm going to go ahead and snip it in half, like so. And then I should be able to just slip it over the unit that we have here. I may need to do some hand fitting by adjusting the length of the metal, but I should be able to slip it over. Yeah, looks like I just remove a little bit more, not a whole lot. This is just one of those things where you just have to test fit every so often when you make an adjustment until finally you get it at the right length. At a certain point, it'll just slip over the appropriate location. And once it does, you can then go ahead and super glue it in place. After the band is secured in place, the next thing to add is the fastener detailing. On the unit, there's a little bolt and clasp type system right here dead center. It kind of reminds me of something that you would see on a hose clamp, you know, where you have that bolt encased in that little tube structure. Regardless, in order to fabricate it in this scale, I'm going to utilize the following method. Over here, I have a very thin little rod of 3D printed resin. This is actually a scrap piece of sprue from another 3D printed 1/35 scale kit that I've already built in the past, and probably by the time this video drops is already found on the channel. Regardless, what's nice about these sections here is that they're very thin and they cut and sand very easily. For something like this, you can try to make it out of a piece of wire, but trying to cut metal to this length and making sure it's nice and squared away is a bit problematic, so the polymer method is the best way to go. If you're doing this, and obviously you do not have something like this on hand, one way to mimic this is to actually do the stretched sprue technique. This is basically the old-time and tested way on how to make antennas for plastic models, where you take a sprue, you heat it with a candle or with a hairdryer or a heat gun, and you just stretch it out to its nice, thin little segment. From there, you can snip it, and you have basically the same setup. Because I have this resin here, it's not necessary. So to do this, I'm going to carefully just snip a small little section here with a pair of clean cut snips. And then I'm just going to add a little drop of glue here on the surface where I want it. You only need a finite amount of glue. And then from here, I'm just going to carefully drop this fella in place, and hopefully I get it right on the first try, and well, looks like I did. Okay, usually it's a bit tricky because of the small size of the unit, but on this one here, I got very lucky, and you can see that with that little detailing added in place, it's going to blend in seamlessly with the detailing, and it's going to look even better once everything is painted and weathered. The very last thing I'm going to be doing to the turret before I get this thing into paint involves the main armament. As you can see, it's very, very loose and droopy. So in order to take care of this, I'm going to use some white glue over here. I'm going to squirt a glob into the pivoting section. The white glue is going to set, gum up the works, and it will add some resistance. This is a common technique that I mention on many of my videos for some very good reasons. First, it's not a permanent type system, which means unlike super glue, where if you add it, it could solidify and basically you can break it by trying to wiggle the thing loose. Similar is also true with a small little drop of cement. White glue, that's not the case. It does not adhere to the plastic that well, and because of that, it will allow the piece to crack and pivot, but it will stay in the general location and will hold it nice and snug. The white glue also cleans up very easily in case there's a mishap or two, so that's also a plus. But one thing about the white glue to mention is that it can eventually wear out. So if you're playing with the thing often, the white glue will eventually crumble away, and then the piece will be back to square one. Fortunately, this thing is a static model. I'm not exactly going to be playing with it, so it should last basically for the life of the model that we have here. And in case that does happen to you, well, it's not too hard to replace. You just put another glob or squirt of white glue on the inside and basically repeat the setup. After that entire build process leads us to this point right here where the model is ready for painting. Well, it already entered into paint, but that was just the primer, and now we're going to go for the base coat. For the primer itself, as I always mention in these videos, you ask 5 different people how to paint a model, you're going to get 5 different answers. But more or less, the one thing we can all agree on is that you need to have some sort of coat of primer on the model in order to help the paint stick better. For my application here, I just roll with El Cheapo flat black spray paint. It's the stuff here that you pick up from Home Depot. The stuff from Walmart's pretty good. The stuff from Lowe's is alright, but the Home Depot one is a bit higher quality from my experience. I like to roll with the spray paint because it's very affordable and you get a decent volume of it. Not to mention, it's really easy to come by. Just take a trip down to Home Depot and you can pick up a 12-pack of them. Some other people out there, they like to use a more dedicated model primer. It does work. There are a lot of people that have really good results with those. Me, personally, I'm a bit simplistic with my painting, so I'm just going to roll with that stuff, and it works fine from, again, my experience, and you can see all the builds on the channel. Once the spray paint is thoroughly dried, of course, is then ready for the base coat. For this model here, I'm going to be painting it slightly differently compared to some of the other builds that are seen on the channel. Typically, I go a flat exterior latex, which is house paint, that I mixed up with my own mix, and I go about the pros and cons about that, and that is still 100% valid. However, for this one here, I'm going to roll with a slightly different method. For this build here, I'm going to roll with Tamiya acrylic paint, and I'm rolling with Tamiya German Gray XF63. The reason why I'm rolling with this one is because for this particular build, I want it to look a bit different compared to the other Panzer IV ausf.Ds that I have in my collection, and by the time this video drops, I'll probably have one or two of the other videos already up, because, spoiler alert, this is actually the fourth Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D that I've built, and two of which are also in a Panzer Gray or Schwarzgrau type overall color scheme. For this one here, in order to make it look a little bit different, I'm going to roll with the Tamiya, because the other ones I rolled with the exterior latex, and I also weathered them differently. The other reason why I'm rolling with a Tamiya is personal. It's because it's a bit of a throwback and an homage to the way the model was originally built the first time around, where I went ahead and used Tamiya on it, so I just want to recapture a bit of that old nostalgia. On a similar note, this model is going to be weathered differently compared to the other ones as well. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the other ones that I mentioned before were weathered with sun fading effects, and for this one here, I'm going to go on the opposite end. I'm going to go dark with it. So this one is not going to get any sun fading effects. It is going to get modulation, but not sun fading effects. For the modulation, I do it a bit differently compared to a lot of other builders out there, where at this point here, they would airbrush some white or tan or whatever color onto the model surface, and then apply the base coat in a translucency type setup until it builds up to the point where they call it complete. That technique is one that's very popular. I hate that technique. I don't like it at all. It's got some cons to it, where, first of all, I just don't like the fact that you're just playing around with opacities and you don't technically actually have the tank thoroughly painted. The other thing is, it's a bit risky, because say you know, these models, you tend to have mishaps happen sometimes. Either you'll get a fingerprint on something, you'll drop a little drop of paint on something, you can scratch something. You know, there's a bunch of different ways you can screw something up. And if you go with this method, where you go with the model with a high opacity first and then add the weathering to it, it makes it easier to touch up, as opposed to the other way, where technically it's not fully painted, so you have these wacky opacity effects, and good luck trying to blend that in. It's definitely less than ideal for an overall finish, in my opinion. Also, at the end of the day, it looks exactly the same, I find, if I go the other way around as opposed to going with the opacity method. So that's how I do it, and that's exactly how I'm going to roll with this one here. For the base coat, I'm going to roll with my double action airbrush, which is right here. This is my go-to for the paint work, and I'm just going to simply dilute the paint a little bit with a few drops of tap water, as I often reference. A lot of people like to go with some sort of specialty modeling paint thinner. Me, for acrylics, I just roll with tap water, and it works just fine. The other thing, of course, I reference, besides the airbrush, is the air compressor. That's also something that a lot of people forget to factor in when they're looking at getting an airbrush. A good airbrush is key, but that's really just half the equation. You also need a good air compressor that can output both quantity of air as well as volume of air. So you want to have the PSI running where you can airbrush the entire model and not have to take breaks because you're losing PSI. If you're working with one of those little smaller air compressors, they don't exactly have a tank on them. So the most amount of air it's going to get is right before you push the plunger. As soon as you do that, the air is going to just drop on you to a point where it balances out, and it's going to be very, very anemic, in my opinion. Some people out there like to say that that's not the case. I have the bubbler ones, and there's a reason why I don't use them. The one with the tank, I could paint literally an entire 1/6 scale tank with it, do camouflage and weathering with it, and I never once lose PSI. So that's another thing to consider. Another thing about the little air compressors is also the PSI that you do get out of those compressors are very anemic compared to something that's more industrial. You'll be lucky to get 5 or 10 PSI at max from one of those air compressors. Meanwhile, I'm actually rolling with about 60 when I apply my base coat, as well as my camouflage and weathering. And of course, with these units here, I could dial that down to whichever way I deem fit, depending on the circumstance, but generally I'm running with high PSI when I paint my models. Those little ones, you're ruling with about, again, 5 to 10, 15 at most, and furthermore, you're not going to be rolling at 15 throughout the entire duration. You're going to be rolling with 15 as soon as you push down that plunger. After a couple seconds, you're going to drop down immensely. And that's, again, another reason why I hate those little units. You'll never see me roll with one of those in my shop. One last thing I want to mention is with the paint. With paints all across the board, you want to have them thoroughly mixed before you go ahead and put into the paint cup and apply it to the model. Seems straightforward, and it's one of those no-brainer type things. But a lot of people forget that concept. In fact, I know one person specifically that just refuses to understand you got to mix the paint. He seems to think you just do this with the bottle, it's mixed, and then, oh, he just gets nothing but head on the paint, not the actual base itself, just the solvent on the top portion. Then he tries applying it, and it comes glossy, or it's runny, it looks like crap, and then he's trying to scratch his head. Why? It's because you didn't mix the paint. So to mix the paint, you can shake it, which is something that I do as well. However, to really make sure that this stuff is thoroughly mixed, you need to stir it, and for that I use a nail. You may be tempted to try to use a wooden stick like this one here to do this, but this is actually a bad idea. Reason is because twofold. First, the bottles aren't exactly that big with an opening. If you put this in here when the bottle's new, you actually can spill it, and it's a bit harder. The other thing, and it's actually more important, is that because this is wood, it's porous, and you're going to be drinking, and it's actually going to be absorbing the paint into the wood, which, guess what, now you have less paint to do the actual job. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. With the nail, it's not absorbing crap, so you can mix this, wipe the paint back into the bottle, and you're good to go. That's why, another reason why I don't use mixing sticks for the Tamiya paint specifically. For my exterior latex, oh yeah, I use them all the time, but then again, keep in mind, I have a little gallon of this stuff, and I tend to be mixing it in greater volumes, so the stick works better for that circumstance. For the Tamiyas over here, absolutely not. I'm rolling with a stick. Now, I can mask up and get this thing painted. After the base coat sets and is fully dry, I then go ahead and hit it again with a second coat. This hits certain areas that the opacity either isn't all the way up there, or it's just some areas that I completely missed. And on a Panzer IV like this, where it's relevant is actually in here in the grill area, as well as also back here. As you see, there's lots of stuff going on over here, and this could easily block certain mist from getting in there, and you want to make sure you hit those after the paint is dry. If you try hitting that when the paint's still wet, it's just going to potentially get some drips, which is something that is not really helping you. Also, when I hit it with the second coat, I flip over the road wheels and I take care of the opposite sides. On the row wheels, because this model is pre-built, the paintwork is a little bit more convoluted because you have to carefully go in here and paint the middle sections. Obviously, these areas are easily missed when you're just hitting the faces of it, and it's something that can easily hurt the look of the build. On my fresh builds, this is something that I actually paint while on the runners, so it's a great way to streamline and simplify the build and paint a little bit. With all of the paintwork now out of the way, however, I should say with the base coat out of the way, it's now time for me to start with the weathering. Generally, on a number of my builds, this is where I would start adding some of the effects, namely some sun fading effects, filters, things along those lines. However, like I mentioned before, this one's going to be painted very differently. So instead of going with the lightning effects, I'm actually going to go ahead and make it darker. And the way I'm going to do that is with the edging. On my builds, no matter how I build them, I always do the edging the same way, and this again flies in contrast to some other individuals out there, where the norm would be again to prime the model gray, edge it with the airbrush, and add some translucent layers over until you get the modulated effect. As I already said before, I don't like that technique for the reasons that I already mentioned, and so for my effects, I like to add it after the model is thoroughly painted with its base coat. For the counter shading, I'm going to be utilizing my acrylic paint. This is Tamiya Acrylic Flat Black, but this one here is a special type of Tamiya Flat Black. This one here has been diluted with just standard rubbing alcohol, so it is very, very thin. This is actually the exact same paint that I use on my interiors when I wash the insides with the weathering agent, and it has a nice grimy look to it. It's the same stuff here, only the difference is that this one's applied with the airbrush in strategic locations, as opposed to the other way where it's either just thoroughly just sprayed on and then I use the air to puddle into certain areas, or if I'm utilizing a paintbrush for that type of effect. Neither of those are relevant for this build over here. If I ever do another build with an interior, I'll definitely be sure to point that out. But for this one, it's just going to be done with the edging. The edging will give you two things. First, it'll give you essentially the exact same look that those other builders out there achieve with the other method. And it'll also, specifically on this build, have the illusion of actually lightening up the color. So as I stated before, this one here, I want to go with the color being as depicted as a darker shade of Panzer Gray, as opposed to the lighter shade. And by just going with this method, I effectively have this here being the lightest part. And as you can see, it's much darker compared to the other shades of Panzer Gray builds I've done in the past. Alright, so the paint is thoroughly mixed. The way, by the way, I create this paint is when I'm using my flat black and I'm actually running to the end and the bottle's empty, I actually top it off with some rubbing alcohol, and this dilutes the paint that's already in the bottle, and it essentially creates what I have here. I always end up making this stuff because when I always run out of paint, I just basically squirt the alcohol into the bottle, stir it up, and then I pour the contents into this fellow over here, thus keeping this bottle topped off in perpetuity. The airbrush I'm going to be using is, of course, my Poshy double action airbrush, the same one that I used before on the base coat, and this is what I use on all of my small scale model builds. And I just want to say, when it comes to airbrushing, in case anyone is new to airbrushing and they're stumbling upon this video, I prefer double action airbrushes over single actions. I have used them in the past and I just don't dig them. As for what the difference is, honestly, there are YouTube videos out there that go into this information in far more depth and detail compared to what I can in the time that I have here. But needless to say, you have far more control over the outcome with a double as opposed to a single. In a quick nutshell, the single only allows you to control the volume of air, while on a double, it allows you to control both the air as well as the quantity of paint. And with those two, you can fine-tune the thing to where you're getting the right amount of paint in the right location with the right amount of air. And all that is relevant specifically on things like camouflage patterns and weathering and things along those lines. Because the paint is so diluted, it is very, very thin, and it makes airbrushing that much easier. The paint is going to be translucent because of how thin it is, which is exactly what you want. You don't want to have the edging be overly opaque, because that could just throw off the look as opposed to assisting it. And if I apply it and it dries to a point where I think it could be improved, I just hit it with a second time around, and it'll deepen the opacity. Pour that in the bottle. As you can see, you can see the opacity right over there coming through, and it just makes for a nice little wash. But I'm exclusively just utilizing this for the edging. You do not want to thoroughly wash a model painted in acrylics or latex with this type of stuff, because it will actually start dissolving the paint on the surface, specifically when it's on in, I should say when it's applied up in volume. It will really change the color. It's not something that will necessarily help you. Remember the tank to strip down the acrylic paint, I dunked it in, you guessed it, denatured alcohol, which is the stronger cousin to the rubbing alcohol, which is used in the paint that I have here. But in small, thinned out batches like this, it's more than suffice. Okay, as you can see, it's working just fine. Let's go ahead and start the paint work. I always start on the bottom of the hull here just to get a good feel of it. And I basically, again, just go through the edging. After a while, you can see the color starting to poke through. And this is exactly what I was referring to. The tank's color is still dark, but it does have the counter shading going on with the edging. And as I mentioned before, when it's all said and done, you'll get basically essentially the same effects as if you would have pre-shaded it with those other techniques. But in this way, in my opinion, it's much easier and easier to touch up if the case does arise. This is also a more simplistic way to weather. So if you're like a beginner and you don't have your skill sets ironed out fully with the use of more complex washes and filters and things along those lines, you can still have some excellent results that are very similar to those other ones by just rolling with this procedure that we have here. So it's also a good thing just to keep in your toolbox, either if you're a beginner or if you're like me and you just want to just have something a little bit different in the collection. The last thing you want to do is fall into the trap where all your builds look the same, and that's something that can very easily happen, specifically if you build a lot of models. You fall into this, like, not a rut, but you fall into a complacency where you're just going through the motions and it becomes more or less like a assembly line as opposed to a individual piece of art. So it's definitely a trick, or I should say a hazard to watch out for any builder out there. And I myself have fallen into this in the past, where I used to use the same color, the same weathering every single time, and all of my builds for a little period of time basically all look the same. So you want to step outside your comfort zone at times, try different techniques, different paints, different tints, and you'll be surprised what that'll do for you. I always add a lot of little streaks over here where the tracks run. Remember, this is where the tank will get the most dirtiest, specifically with crap being drugged up by the tracks. And on that note, no, I will not put any mud or weathering or earth effects on my builds. I never do. I hate those techniques, in case anyone's wondering. I just never like that. I like the models to look, as I like to refer to them, as used but well maintained, where the paint is shading, you have drips of certain types of oils and exhaust soot and things like that, but the thing is washed clean and there's none of that crap on the surface. Some people out there hate that, but it's my channel, it's my model, and I'll do whatever the hell I want. Alright, so you can see the color starting to pop through. Once the thing is varnished, as after it gets the other effects, it's really going to start coming on better light. Let me cut across to when this is all completed. Or I should say, let me cut across to when I'm working on the upper hull here, because that's really where you get to see more of it. But so far, it's definitely so good. And that's all there is to it, to the airbrush weathering. In fact, that's the last of the major airbrush weathering outside of the powder fouling that's going to be done to this build. More on that as the video goes on. But as for the outer appearance itself, as you can see, the counter shading did an excellent job with changing the overall look of the build. As we saw before, the model looked very, very flat compared to the way it looks now, and now the model has a little bit more life. With this technique here, like I said before, the model can get no lighter than the color found on the base coat, and it does this weird optical illusion when you add the counter shading, and it just changes the color, makes it look like something that it isn't. But, you know, that's part of the magic that is model making. So, with the airbrushing out of the way, the next step is going to be the panel line accent. And for this, I'm rolling with Tamiya black panel line accent. This stuff is great. I've been utilizing it on all the builds for the last, I want to say 3 or 4 years now, so it's funny how time flies, but this stuff here is excellent. You can pick it off of Amazon, hobby shops. It's worth the money. This stuff here is an enamel-based solution as opposed to the acrylics, which is good because you can apply this to the surface and it shouldn't cause any problems interfering with the base paint, be it acrylic or, as on my other builds, exterior latex. The only time where this becomes an issue is if you're one of those holdouts that still have a stash of Model Master enamels. If that's you, stay away from this. Do not utilize this on the builds because it will dissolve the paint. If that's you, oddly enough, you might want to go with the thinned out alcohol solution here because this will actually not harm the enamel finish found on those paints. So there you go. On this one here, I'm going to, well, in case anyone has ever utilized this stuff before, it has a little miniature brush built into the cap. However, I'm not going to utilize that. I like to just go with a small precision paintbrush, and I just use it in that manner. I'll show some of the application briefly. So, like I said before, I utilize a small precision paintbrush. You also want to have some mineral spirits on hand in a small little cup, just in case you add it to a certain location and it's too dark and you just want to wipe it down. That's easily done with a little bit of mineral spirits, and you can just wipe it off. Just paint thinner and or mineral spirits, whatever, same stuff. It will dislodge the enamel-based solution with ease. I'll just put that over there. I just use the cap like that. You don't need a whole lot, generally. I'm going to make sure the stuff is thoroughly mixed. Doesn't take too much to mix this stuff. The reason why I have my thumb over it, because I could get a better grasp and I can mix it better, I find, with my thumb over the opening here as opposed to keeping the cap on. Your results may vary. So it's on the brush. I'll go ahead and apply it over here. This stuff is great. It just has a nice knack of getting into little molded in recesses like on these leaf springs over here. Hopefully that comes out on camera, but it just loves to seep in there and it just highlights things immensely. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here with these little fastener, just like that. And there you go. Awesome. You've literally got to do this to every single recess on this build or every single little bit of detailing, and trust me, it will definitely pay off in the end. It's probably one of the more time-consuming aspects on these builds, but you know what? It's definitely worth it with the final end result. With the panel line accent out of the way, the next thing to take care of is going to be the final layer for me, and that's going to be the dry brushing. The dry brushing is going to give you the chips, the worn edge look that is typically seen on my vehicles. To do this technique, this is done, again, via dry brush, and the tool of choice for me is a fan brush like this one here. Nice soft fan brush is what I prefer for my dry brushing, be it for the scratched steel surfaces on weapons or the scratched edges or just paint chipped edges that you tend to see on my vehicles themselves. For the color I'm going to use is flat black. This is a color I've been using for a few years now, and I really like the way it looks. It just has a nice overall look on the vehicle once everything is said and done. For the flat black itself, this is something that may cause some contention out there with some gatekeeping elitists, and it's always fun to pee in their eye. And I'm going to use none other than Rust-Oleum flat black. That's right. Some people are probably wondering, well, John, why don't you use the Tamiya acrylic flat black or any other type of brand of modeling flat black? And the answer is quite simple. First, I got tons of this stuff on hand. I use it for other purposes besides paint work. But the other reason is the acrylic paints will work in the same manner with the fan brush. However, I prefer the enamel for this because the enamel is reversible. What I mean by that is if I'm going through the motion with the dry brushing and say I get some paint in a location where I'm not happy with it, well, I could simply just take some mineral spirits on a paintbrush and just blot the area down, and then it wipes away smooth as if it never happened. You cannot do that with acrylics because the model's acrylic. If I try to do the same thing with rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol, yeah, it's not going to work out too well. So that's why I prefer using enamel for this application specifically. Again, because my models are painted with enamel and or latex. If they were painted with enamels, obviously that's going to be a different story. I would have to basically do the Bizarro World version of that. As for why I have Rust-Oleum, again, it's plentiful, easy to find, and I like the way it works. It works really well for me on my builds, and basically that's all there is to it. So to do the job, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the paint. Obviously I don't have a whole lot left in this can. It's kind of coming down to the bottom over here. Pop it open. There's my paint right there. I pretty much just use what's on the lid of the can. There's no point for this type of application to go into the can itself, even though, like I said before, I'm pretty much at the bottom of the can on this one. And to do the technique, basically, I'm just going to go ahead and just use the top bristles here of the brush, like so. And basically the way you just seen me apply it over there is how I'm just going to go on the surfaces. I like to start with the corners over here on the lower hull. And depending how much wear I want to have on it, I could have a little like that or something like that. Or I could have just a little bit more. I could also add a few little ticks to the center of the plate, as you can see. Basically, whatever way I deem fit. Like I stated before, this is not permanent, so if there is a paint chip or a tear on something that I'm not really happy with the way it looks, some mineral spirits on a paintbrush and it's gone. This, by the way, of course, has to be done after the panel line accent, because the panel line accent is basically this type of paint but thinned out. If I do this before the panel line accent, it's going to make a mess and it's going to run all over the place. So if you're using this type of technique, you're going to need to do this in a layer type format. Same thing down here. Doesn't hurt to add a few little ticks on the bottom of the hull. Just makes me feel better. Also, you get to practice a little bit. Something like that. Where you really want to add some tick marks are right over here on the top section. Obviously, this is where the tracks are going to be spinning and it's going to be bringing up junk and all sorts of stuff. So it's not uncommon for you to get quite a few chips and scrapes in these areas over here. Like so. You could go a little bit more precise with it with a different type of brush. With the fan brush, you get to cover larger surface area here, but if you want to go a little more in-depth with it, yeah, you could do the same technique with a smaller paintbrush, and there are lots of other YouTubers out there that show tutorials how to do that. I can do that too. I have done it in the past, but I'm going to sound like I'm being lazy here, but frankly,
ain't nobody got time for that.
So this way gives me, I always found that this way gives me a good medium on surface coverage, as well as also I'm just happy with the end result. The biggest thing to watch out for is not to have any repetitive type paint chips. And to do that, I basically use different areas of the paintbrush in order to differentiate it. So that's to prevent any sort of chipping that looks like a repeat, and that's something that doesn't really help you too much. And as you can see, it's looking pretty good. The tin work, you kind of want to scuff up the inside a little bit because, you know, again, crap gets brought up by the tracks. So it's not uncommon for these to get dinged up pretty easily and often. And there you go. So that's basically what I'm looking for. Again, you have as much control as you want. You could go a little bit heavy with it. You could go lighter with it. It just depends on the overall look and feel you want to have for your build. In addition to the dabbing, if you just go with the dry brushing method, you can see how you can get the surfaces scuffed up in the way I just did over here. Do the same thing to the opposite side. Hopefully you get this in real time. And there you have it. Do the same thing to the opposite side. Specifically down here with these leaf springs, they would definitely show some wear with some usage. As with the swing arms over here, I could tell you from the RC ones, yeah, you tend to get some crap built up in these sections here. When the brush hits a certain point and the paint starts drying out to a point where you don't have any control anymore, all you gotta do is wash down some turpentine or mineral spirits or what have you. I got that here in this old Folgers container. Wash it out. Do the Bob Ross paint dry method, or brush drying method, I should say. And once that's out of the way, you could resume with the paintwork. Could use your head, think how rocks and gravel would get kicked up by certain things. Like in the corners over here, specifically right here, you get some stuff. I could do the same thing to the opposite side. Also, when the brushes are washed out, the paint on the surface acts a little bit differently. It's hard to explain, but it's a little bit smoother, and you could again have some different effects with it. During the paintwork, I'm kind of glad this happened. I have some spots here that I don't really necessarily want, so to take care of it again, small paintbrush, mineral spirits, and watch what happens. Gone. So I stated before, can't really do that if it was acrylic. With that out of the way, see if version 2.0 comes out a little bit better to my liking. And there you have it. Maybe less so. Okay, like, let me see if I get rid of this one here. I'm not too happy with that one. Okay, so got rid of that one. And, yeah, screw it. Why not? Get rid of this guy. There we go. So there you have it. That's why I prefer using some hardware store grade of Rust-Oleum. Of course, if you had some sort of other specialty paints from Model Master, if you even still have those, you could do the same thing. But again, I just like using other stuff. It's just a little bit more pragmatic. Also, one thing I want to mention, the brush is slightly damp with the mineral spirits, and you can see just how the paint is reacting slightly different to it. And again, it just gives you a slightly different effect. That can help. Oop, too much there. Take care of that. And that's basically what it is. It's just a volleyball match of applying blots and then sometimes getting rid of them when they are not to your liking. This is the part of the build that's probably some of the more time consuming. But you know, Rome was not built in a day and you don't want to rush. It's not a race. You just want to go ahead and build the thing up appropriately. when you're doing one of this, you want to use your head to think exactly where the crews would walk and where stuff would get bunked into on the tank, because this would really start to have an effect on exactly where would happen. Like for instance, right here on the hatches, whenever you would open up the hatch, you would probably get some chips in these sections over here. Like so. Near the hinges. The areas where you need to get in there with a pry bar and lift it up. There are no handles on this one. I mean, there are in this one, which, yeah, you would have some paint chips on that, like so. Definitely on the tire rack. On this little neck guard, yeah, you would have some chipping there too. Oop, uh-oh. Yep, you don't want that. No, no, no. Be gone. And again, you have two types of options. You could either dab it, you can smear it laterally, or you can do a little bit of both. It just depends on the technique and depends on what exactly are you trying to achieve. A little too much again. Like I said before, it's a boxing match on what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. Also, the paint looks a little bit differently when it's dry as opposed to when it's wet. This is also something to factor in. And it's also another one of those things that tends to be a bit easier when you're not filming it. I'm just going to continue this and we'll cut across to one that was already completed for the next step. The next step after the weathering are the markings. The markings are some Tamiya water slide decals that I had spare from all the other Panzer IV ausf.Ds that I recently completed. This one here, I rendered out as one of the others that are found on the instructions. With the way the instructions are, you have at least 4 different options to mark the vehicle up, and as it turns out, I have built an example of literally all 4 of them. Although on the instruction sheets, there are a few other markings that are not present, so technically you can, or I should say they're not present on the instructions, so technically there's our super secret other markings to add to one of these builds to render them in a different way. I guess they're kind of like the 2 hidden, or I should say the 2 super special secret maps at the end of 007 GoldenEye on the N64, where you have to like beat certain missions a certain way in order to unlock them, and when you do unlock them, it's like you're like the coolest kid ever. But back to the model that we have here. So I have all of the markings now added. At this time they have just been applied, the water is thoroughly dry, and they're actually ready for varnishing. But before I varnish them, I'm going to go ahead and start installing the tools. In addition to that, I also went ahead and painted the rubber tires. The rubber work would include both the bump stops. This is something that almost everyone out there forgets to paint on their Panzer IV and Panzer III pattern of vehicles. The bump stops are rubber, and you can see the sections are molded in. The only thing I do is a little swipe of flat black or rubber black, paint those, and the model will be better for it. The next thing I painted were the return rollers. On this model here, it was a bit different compared to the way I usually do it when going through a new fresh build. These pieces here are painted off of the runner because it gives me better access to paint all the wheels thoroughly. When you have the things like this, it becomes a bit more problematic, but I'm still able to paint them regardless. As for how I paint them, it's done with a paintbrush, and I go into this in way more depth actually in the OTR Stug 3 video that I completed a little while ago, or by the time this video gets posted, and there you'll see the actual technique that I used to paint the tires. Same exact one here, no point rethreading old ground. But the tires are painted on the exterior, the interior as well. The only thing I can't get to are the back sections, but again, that's only because the wheels are fitted in place. I hate that. I really wish I could get to the back sections of the tires. The other tires have also been thoroughly painted as well. We'll pan to that momentarily. But, as I mentioned before, we're now painting the tools. In addition to the tools, that would also include the jack block that we have here. This one is generally is a part that I glue on after the components are painted, but because this one was glued on so well, there was no point trying to rip it off. So the piece was carefully painted, and I'm still waiting for the red to dry. Once the Tamiya hull red dries, I'll go ahead and paint the straps, and you'll see what that looks like, again, momentarily. So on the table over here, I have the tools that were supplied with the model. These ones here all survived. I just simply cleaned up any glue chunks that were on them, and I painted them. This would be also including the jack that we have here. The spare track links, these are fresh ones. There's no point trying to clean up the old ones. Since I literally have like an abundance of these from all the other Panzer IV FDs I've recently completed, well, just why not? Grab the fresh ones, deburr them, paint them, and these guys here are waiting to get weathered. The other tools have been weathered at this time. As you can see, I also went ahead and painted the wooden handles, again with Tamiya Hull Red. Once that dries, I'll be able to then paint the tool posts and then secure them in place. Some of the tool posts have already been painted, like on these ones over here. These ones I'm just going to do that after the handles are thoroughly dry. On some builds out there, a lot of people like to do this when the tool's already fitted to the model. A lot of people like to build the model complete with the tools already pre-installed and then paint around them. Me, I don't like that technique per se. It does have some advantages. The one advantage is that if you are painting your model with lots of advanced filters and things along those lines, it's easier to have them all blend in because obviously they're painted on this, or everything is painted in one go, as opposed to trying to paint them separately, and it could potentially make a little, or add some complications to the build. So that's one advantage that it does have. However, I personally like to paint them off the model because I like to thoroughly paint all the handles and things like that, and when these things are secured in place, it becomes much more difficult to thoroughly paint the handles. You have a greater risk of there being collateral damage where you could miss, or the paint could be runny and it could spill on the model. It opens up a lot of other problems. Having said that, I have done models in the past in that configuration, so it is definitely doable, and it's one that, again, I've done on a number of occasions already seen on this channel, but me personally, I prefer to like to have the tools done separately. But either way will work. It's just the other way you will have to need to stay on the ball and have your techniques more ironed out. And also, most importantly, your paint has to be spot on. That's also true for this way as well. It's always a good rule of thumb to have your paint on point, but it's definitely really, I can't stress enough, really important to have that fully fleshed out and perfect when you're doing it with the other method. On the tools themselves, the weathering is done with some dry brushing. Here I spray painted some Ace brand spray paint on this section here, and I use that with the dry brushing techniques to get the worn metal look. It's the same technique that I've mentioned in a number of my videos I've shown on some model weapon type videos, as well as a few other tutorials that I've shown in the past. Same technique added to the metal sections. Once that sets, I then go ahead and paint the wooden handles. Again, Tamiya Hull Red applied via the paintbrush. Once those dry, I can then go ahead and start painting the clamps and the tool posts. That's going to be painted with Tamiya Panzer Gray, and of course done with a precision paintbrush. And on that note, there is this one D-list YouTuber out there that loves to seethe, like just unironically seethe in the comment section whenever I would mention these components as tool posts as opposed to tool clamps. And yeah, so that nut job was muted into oblivion, so he's probably just yelling at himself and talking to himself at this point, not realizing that his podcast got muted. So yeah, he's really mad that I referred to these as tool posts. So anyway, back on the tool posts, I painted the tool posts with a paintbrush with Tamiya Panzer Gray, and then once the tool posts are dry, I'll then secure the tools with the tool posts on the model in their appropriate location. So that's something that's going to be done with the tool post. Feels good. Anyway, so once that's done, once all the tools are mounted in place on the model, then the model can go to the next step, which will be the varnish work. After the tools are fitted, the model is now ready to head into varnish. Part of the reason why I like to varnish the model after the tools are fitted in place is because if there's any sort of glue marks just from a little bit of adhesive gushing out from the sides when you drop the piece in place, or if you have any little bit of CA fog from just the part setting, this is easily addressed with the varnish. Once it goes on, it thoroughly blends it over, and it makes all of those mentioned things completely invisible. So it's a really good step to do at that point. The varnish that I'm using is my tried and true VMS matte varnish, stuff I've been using for about 3 or 4 years now, and I'm definitely not looking back. It's really, really good. I like to mix the stuff up before it's used, and you'll notice I do that without the protective cap in place. If you try to mix it with the cap still there, it's just going to gush out from the top, and you're going to be, yeah, it's going to make a bit of a mess. So I just like to put my thumb over the thing like that, and I shake it for about a minute or so. Just count 60 seconds, and I'm good to go. For the application, it's going to be done with the airbrush. I have here the Poshy Talon. This is the dedicated airbrush I use for varnishing in the shop. It's a fantastic airbrush, and it's definitely one I would recommend. Not just for varnishing, of course, but for just basic airbrushing needs. It's a fantastic airbrush. As a quick side note, if you are going to do a suspension type of a system, you want to make sure that the wire's bent in a way where it makes absolutely no contact whatsoever with the side sections of the vehicle, because what will happen is it'll make contact with these sections, the stuff will adhere to it, and then you kind of glued it on, and then when you pop the piece off, you can have a little remnant where the piece once stood. So that's something that can hurt the look, and you want to avoid that. If you bend the wire like this, I did over here, you can see that it could basically trapeze itself on the wire, and it's not going to make contact with any portion on the sides. From here, I'm going to go ahead, mask up, get the air compressor powered on, and get this thing thoroughly varnished. After the tank was varnished, it's now time to focus on the tracks. The tracks are the original kit supply ones and are in pretty good shape. The original paint that was on the surface all brittled up and chipped away, revealing the original material underneath. There are some shards of paint still left on the surface, but it shouldn't be a problem, and I can just simply paint and weather over it. The one thing to mention about the tracks is that these were originally painted with flat black spray paint, and this is just how I did things back in the day. However, times have definitely changed, and I'm not going to utilize that material on these tracks, nor have I used them for quite some time. And there is a reason to that. Even though flat black spray paint is super convenient and it's really, really affordable, it does have some downsides, and one is with the tracks themselves. Depending on the brand and make of the spray paint, and also depending on the tracks themselves, they can have a negative reaction to the paint, either where you put the paint on the surface and the tracks will begin to have a negative effect where they begin falling apart or melting on you. Or on the opposite end, which is even worse, you'll build a model, be sitting in your collection just fine, and after time it can have a long-term effect on the tracks, and they could brittle up and dry rot into oblivion. This is something that I have personally seen on more than one occasion with the single-piece vinyl tracks in conjunction with spray paint. Don't believe me? Go ahead and watch the Stug 3 OTR video where I show what happened to those tracks that were spray painted after a long duration of time, and they just crumbled into dust. So the best way I've seen so far to avoid this is to paint the single piece vinyl tracks with acrylics. The acrylics I'm going to be utilizing are just Tamiya XF1, which is flat black for the base, and so far for all the builds that I've done, and some of which are past the 10-year-old mark, they seem to be holding up quite well. And many of these tracks, by the way, are painted with the, or I should say, are built with the universally hated by the certain aspects of the community, DS styrene tracks. That those idiots will tell you that those tracks just brittle up no matter what you do, but they have no idea what they're talking about because my tanks are going past 10 years now and the tracks are just fine. Why? Because I'm painting them with acrylics. But I could make a whole video, and probably will at some point, on just that topic. Back to these ones over here. The tracks themselves are pretty good for what they are, like I mentioned earlier, and they are going to be painted, but before I do that, there is some prep work that needs to be done to the tracks. Not a whole lot, something that's really easily done, but it's one of those things that some people tend to forget. On the tracks, they do not come on a sprue per se like the second generation Tamiya ones. Instead, they have a sprue that is snipped away at the factory, but there are certain little runner sections found on the two sections of the track that need to be removed. You can see one most prominently right here. Hopefully it comes into focus. And there we go. That little guy, yeah, he's got to go. And there are a few of these strewn about every 6 or 7 links or so on the track bands. There's another one right there. And these are something that are very easily addressed and taken care of with a clean cut snip. Go ahead, go through the motions, and the build will look 10 times better if you do that. The snip, again, makes really short work of this, so if I could get this bad boy here in focus. You don't want to over snip, obviously. You just want to snip just the top section where the sprue is there. There you go. The piece has been pruned. And basically, you just got to do that to all the links where it's necessary. On some of the older kits here, like this one, you may have a little bit of vinyl flash protruding from the sides. This one doesn't seem to have it, so that's good. But occasionally, it's not surprising to have a little, like, tail up. There's one actually right over here. Little tail sticking out from the track itself. Hopefully that comes in focus right there. And yeah, just a little snip there is all you need to do. Just do that prep work, and the tank here will build into something that is a lot better compared to just leaving it stock. At this point here, I'm about to apply the base coat to the tracks, and you'll see that one trick that I like to do is I like to put masking tape down on my painting surface over here, and this is great because it prevents the tracks, or mitigates as much as possible, the tracks from blowing away during the painting procedure. Obviously, you're blowing on it with some compressed air, with some force, so the pieces wanting to pop off is something that can easily happen. And when you're trying to paint these things and they're running around all over the place, it just makes for a problematic situation. So I'm going to go ahead, paint the tracks in this manner. I'm going to go ahead, paint the inner sides first because the flat sections allow the thing to sit much more easily. Also, I could hit either side of the teeth, and this is something that's generally missed when you're painting tracks. So by going with this way, it simplifies and it's a bit more efficient. After the paint is thoroughly set and dried, I go ahead, flip it over, and I repeat the painting process on the top portions. Then from there, the thing goes into weathering, and then assembly, and then installation. And after all of that work brings us to this point that we have here, where the model is 100% completed. Let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. Starting with the suspension, with the model fully complete, you really get to appreciate all the work that was done to the bodywork area. That was right there in the middle. And as you can see, the thing is completely smooth as if it was never there. Also, one thing to mention about the suspension is with the rear idler wheel. On all these Panzer IV vehicles, the rear idlers were steel rimmed. They were never rubber rimmed. So when you're weathering the model, be sure to go ahead and weather it in that type of a format. What you see here is just some silver paint that has been brushed onto those surfaces over there. Obviously, these would polish on very quickly in real life, and seeing paint in these areas really wouldn't be seen after the vehicle is driven a short distance. Also, hopefully on this camera angle, you get to see the rubber bump stops that I mentioned before. This is, again, something that is commonly overlooked on these builds. And if you just want to polish the model up to the next level, just go ahead and paint it with a little swipe of black or rubber black specifically, and the model will actually shine quite a bit. On the topic of rubber bits, takes us to the roll wheels and the return rollers. Just being a ausf.D, the top rollers are of course rubber rimmed, so you have to carefully paint them. On this one here, like I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit tricky to do because the wheels are pre-assembled. This is always best done before the wheels are installed onto the vehicle. But as you can see, I was able to persevere, getting all the paint on the relevant locations, meaning the front, the intersections, as well as the outer extremities. On the rubber tires for the roll wheels, you can see that they have also been thoroughly painted, including the rubber tires. Painting rubber tires on a Panzer IV is doable, of course. It's just one of those things that's the most time-consuming aspect on the vehicle. Because of the small size of the tires, they do paint quickly, but you have to make sure that the paint is at the right consistency, where if it's too thin, it could easily just run a mess, and you want to make sure that the rubber is only painted on the portions that, well, would be rubber on the real vehicle. Like I always mention in these videos, whenever I paint rubber tires, I'm thorough. I paint the outer extremities as well as the inner extremities as well. Hopefully it comes out on camera, but the wheels are thoroughly painted with their rubber sections. As I also referenced before, a lot of people out there, they like to just build the model and paint it with the roll wheels on. And as I already showed, that's a big mistake because you will have areas where the paint just won't be able to get to. So in order to prevent that, just paint everything off the model. Towards the front of the vehicle takes to the sprockets. As I mentioned before, I snipped off the main spindles found on the final drive sections. The reason why I did this was I was playing around with potentially making this thing motorized, but it didn't really work out all that well. So for this one here, I just went ahead and rendered it static. To repair what I did, I just simply drilled out the sections that were originally for the stem, and I replaced them with an 1/8 of an inch steel rod. It just goes in place from side to side, and the two sprockets simply plug to it like they would on the original shafts. Once the pieces are reinstalled, as you can see, it blends in absolutely perfectly. Also on this location takes to the Caterpillar tracks. These, of course, are the same ones that were shown before getting their base coat, but here you get to see what they look like fully painted, weathered, and fitted. The weathering is a mix of both airbrushing and dry brushing. After the flat black was added, I went ahead and took diluted flat white and airbrushed it over the outer areas, and this gives a lightening effect to the tracks, which mimics the parkerization look or that oxide look that I was referencing before. After the paint is fully set, I then take some silver paint and I dry brush the areas that you see here, and that's how I get the effects that you see found here on the outer and inner portions of the track. After the paint work was done, I went ahead and reassembled the tracks. I simply just used the kit method, only I used a little bit drop of super glue in addition to melting the little tabs with the soldering gun. It just gives a bit of extra support and strength to these units, and it'll just hold them together much better in my opinion. The other thing to mention about the Panzer IV and Panzer III pattern of tracks is that there is an orientation to them, and they look symmetrical, and to the untrained eye, they look the same, but there actually is a direction to these tracks. The tracks themselves, if you look at these outer sections over here, you will see these two areas, and they actually angle inward. And they only angle inward in one direction. So when you're installing tracks, make sure that the pieces are actually angling upward. Okay? You could easily install them in reverse where they'll be angling downward, and if you do, it's actually a mistake. If you're assembling any one of these vehicles and you're not sure, go ahead and type into Google a walk around of a Panzer IV or a Panzer III. Plenty of museums out there, and there's a lot of really good references online, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find a nice close-up shot of the track links that have the orientation in the correct way. Also on the section of the model, you get to see the other front details, such as the tow hooks right there, all cleaned up, as well as the tin work springs. Now that they are fully painted, weathered, specifically with that panel line accent, it really makes them shine, and it really gives them all a nice little bit of extra detailing. Also in this area over here, you get to see the headlights. Remember, one of these is a cast resin replacement. And they both blend in absolutely perfectly. And also on this section over here, it takes us to the frontal armor. As I referenced before, in one of the other Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D videos, is that with the way the kit is designed, you have these extra pieces of armor and they just get glued in place. Now, there are no suggestion points or pin marks or anything like that in order to get these things installed in the appropriate manner. So it's got to be done all by feel. And if you're just going through the motions and you don't know any better, you could accidentally glue these two sections too close, which will actually block the driver's visor, which is obviously not something that's really good. So when you're building the model, make sure you render it in this format over here. I have seen a few examples of these kits built online where the builder didn't get the memo, and basically the entire area here is just blocked off. I mean, it's not like it's really important or anything, it's just the only way the driver can see. That's a bit overrated, so. Alright, so carrying on takes to the bow MG. Here you get to see what it looks like with the MG34T fitted in place. This is the standard Tamiya unit, painted, weathered, and I drilled out the muzzle section, as I always do on these builds. Also on the side tin work over here, you get to see all the tools remounted in place. These were the kit original ones that I mentioned before, sans the tracks, and they were just cleaned up, repainted, weathered, and here you get to see what the final outcome is. Also, one thing to mention is the antenna channel over here. Like I referenced before, these are actually wood on the real units. So I went ahead and dry brushed some Tamiya flat brown on these sections over here in order to get the distressed wood look like you see here on this model. This is, again, something that's often overlooked on many builds out there, but if you render it out, it always makes the build look just that much more polished. You also have the antenna over here, and you can see what it looks like with the floor wire fitted in place. And also while on this location takes us to the marking. Now, the cross that's found in this area is one that's a bit troublesome on the Tamiya kit because once you have the channel in place and the shovel in place, you can't really install the decal. And to install the decal, you still have to modify it anyway. You actually have to trim away some portion of the marking in order to clear the antenna channel that's right here in the middle. So this takes a little bit of finesse in order to get the pieces properly cut at the right lengths. Also, this is a perfect reason why you don't want to install the shovel or the tools prior to the model being painted, because with the tools in the way, obviously you're not exactly going to be able to get the cross fitted in place. On the reverse side takes to the other tools. You get to see the fire extinguisher, the wrench, the cutter, as well as the large the socket wrench. Here we have these two little S hooks. Now, these are not the kit original ones. One of them just was totally missing to the sands of time, and the other one was all right, but in order to keep continuity, I had to replace it entirely. So what I did was I fabricated two brand new ones out of metal that were bent to shape, and then I flattened the wire in order to get the shape that we see here. Once the pieces were reshaped, I went ahead and made two new little tool posts out of bent pieces of aluminum. Once everything was painted and weathered and fitted in place, it blends in with the remainder of the vehicle's detailing. Also in the spot takes to the jack block, as I was referencing before, the little straps that we have here that have the rivets on them are actually black on the real vehicles, so you want to carefully paint and weather these accordingly. When you're painting these, you really have to be on point because there's no real molding that separates the side section that would be wood to the strap, so you have to be very careful to make sure that the paint doesn't overstrip and overslip and just run amok. Once everything is properly painted though, it does yield for some excellent results. One other thing to mention about this location is the visor periscope right here. Hopefully it comes out in focus, but there's a little swipe of Tamiya clear gloss in this little prism over here in order to replicate the Panzer glass. This is something that's done on all the other prisms on this vehicle, including the front driver's visor. And it's another one of those details that a lot of people tend to omit. The only caveat is that if you're going to do this, make sure that you have a really, really fine point precision paintbrush, because otherwise, if you miss the little slot, it's just going to cause some problems. The next and last tool I want to reference on this side are the cleaning staves. These are, of course, the kit original ones, and they were just polished up and mounted to this area. The kit does have two options where you can mount these. If you have the armor in place and the wheel mounted back here, the cleaning staves are fitted to this location. Otherwise, it's inverse. The And by inverse, I mean the cleaning staves are mounted in this area over here. The other thing I also want to reference is the paintwork, and this is something that I will always reference in these videos. The cleaning staves, the rods themselves would be wooden rods. However, the end connectors that everything screws together are actually brass fittings, and in order to make the model pop all that much more, a little swipe of gold paint in these two areas is really all you need to do. With the scale being what it is, if you go ahead and just apply the paint in these areas, you really get to see just how much more polished and complete and correct the model looks, as opposed to just leaving everything overpainted. The other thing I also want to reference is the cleaning swab. The swab itself does have a bag over it, and the bag would be the same type of field gray that you see found on German uniforms of the period. So for this over here, it's just a little swipe of Tamiya Field Gray, and that's all there is to it. And moving back a little bit further takes us to the step ladder, and this is actually one of my favorite details for the ausf.D pattern of Panzer IVs. These components here are Tamiya, however, the bottom one I don't believe is the original one from this model. That one I had was an okay shape, but rather than recycling it, I literally had like 4 of these floating around from the other Panzer IV ausf.D kits that, again, I was referencing before in this video. With the way the Tamiya kit is designed, you actually have 2 sets of these as found on the runner, and only one is actually used. And for whatever reason, there's just not one found on the opposite side. So rather than just having that piece languish away in my spare bin, since it was a fresh piece, I simply just painted it, weathered it, and mounted it to the model that we have here. Of course, the original locations were cleaned up, so there's no glue fragments, so the new piece just locks on as it would originally. Also, the rear tire rack, I believe, is another component that was spare from the other Panzer IV kits. And while I'm at it, I almost forgot to mention the support straps that are found on these 2 portions of the tin work. As I mentioned before, these are scratch built because the original one, only one was present, the other one was lost at the sands of time. So I went ahead and fabricated them out of some styrene. Now that the model's fully painted, the piece just blends right in. This logically brings us to the very rear portion of the vehicle, where we have quite a bit going on. Here you get to see the no-tech light with the green lenses painted. The opposite side has the other light that would be present on these vehicles, and note the color for the 2 lenses. The one on top is an amber orange color, while the one on the bottom is a red color. While on the topic of red, that brings us to this little guy here, which would be a reflector on the real unit. The piece is molded in, but it's very subtle, but the piece is still there, so with a little tiny drop of gloss red, that's all that's required to get the piece to look like the way you see it here. Also, while on the back, you get to see the other corrective changes that were made, namely the new guards here for the exhaust manifold, the tow hitch mount that was drilled out, as well as also the exhaust manifold itself. With the unit painted and weathered, it blends in like it did originally. If not, it's just a bit higher quality now because the seam work was thoroughly taken care of. Moving topside, you can see the remainder of the vehicle surfaces. One thing I do want to mention is that little notch that was originally found in this section over here. And as I showed in the video, this was deleted with a little bit of bodywork and some styrene. And now that the model's fully completed, there's no trace at all that that notch was ever present. And that's all there is to mention about the hull, and this takes us to the turret, specifically the rear portion here. As we saw before, the turret is a multi-piece assembly, and because of that, you have a substantial seam line in this area. And as we can recall, when I first built the model, I slathered on a nice thick layer of red tube testers. The model during the rebuild was polished down with several grits of sandpaper, as well as a little bit of wet sanding to finish it off. And now that the model is fully painted and weathered, you get to see the fruits of the labor, and the back portion here is completely smooth without any sort of traces or any sort of evidence that that seam even existed. Also in this area, you get to see the cupola now remounted in the appropriate manner. This did require a little bit of cleanup, but overall went by pretty well. As did the replacement handles on the turret, and you can see just how well everything blends in now that the model's fully completed. Continuing forward brings us to the front plate area, and as I referenced before, this one had those stupid tick marks that were present, and fortunately they were easily polished away, without there being any sort of traces that they once existed. One thing that does need to exist though are the weld beads, and hopefully they come out on camera. And the weld beads came out very, very well with the techniques again that I showed before. Once that paddle line actually goes in there, it just does the job for you and just makes everything just look so much nicer. Also in this location, you get to see the mantlet work and the seam line that is present right there on the front. However, the seams that were originally found on the sides here have been completely blended away. One other thing I want to mention that's an addendum is with the, what I refer to as a counterweight, that's not really what this is. In fact, what this is just a guard to prevent the antenna from getting snagged up into this section over here, and that can interfere with the coax. With the way these early vehicles are, because the antenna is right over there, you can see how the guard works, and on the real unit, because this would be a leaf spring setup, it would harmlessly flex out of the way and would not get in the way of either the coax or the main armament. It may also have some counterweight capabilities as well, but essentially it's really more or less just to prevent the antenna from inhibiting the armament. Either way, still a really cool bit of detailing found on these vehicles, and with that strap mechanism that I mentioned before, it just finalizes the look. And again, it's one of the more iconic details found on this pattern here of Panzer IV. And of course, while in this area, you can see the coax, and that too has been drilled out for the same reasons. That's all there is to the detailing. This, of course, brings us to the paint and the markings. Obviously, I already went over all that info earlier in the video, but with the model now in the photo booth area, you really get to see all those techniques coming out in their full force. You also get to see the finalized look of the decals with the VMS matte varnish applied to all of the surfaces. The only thing that I do not apply the varnish to are the tracks, and the reason is quite simply put, the tracks I like to prevent any sort of extra material on them that needs to be, specifically with single piece vinyls. I want to prevent any sort of way that the tracks can potentially fall apart or dry rot over time, and although the VMS more than likely is a safe material put on them because it is acrylic, I just like to play it safe, so in this case I did throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I don't varnish the tank with the tracks present, if you may have noticed earlier on. Other than that though, I absolutely love that stuff. As you can see, it does the job perfectly. The decals are nice and flat, the color of the model just looks so much more vibrant. I cannot recommend that stuff enough. If you're looking for, let me put it this way, if you're the type of guy who's building models and you always have a problem with those freaking water slide decals, silvering and shining and just being a problem, try the VMS stuff. It should work, and it will give you the best chance to having your model come out nearly perfect. Since you made it to this point in the video, I want to give you a nice little treat, and that is what we have here on the table. So, throughout the duration of the restoration process, I mentioned several times about the other Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D kits I was working on simultaneously while this one here was getting its restoration. Well, it would be video malpractice to mention it all those times without having the opportunity to show all of the built examples right here on the table in all of their splendor. It's a little tricky to get on camera, but here you get to see all 4 of the examples that I have in my collection of the Tamiya Panzer IV ausf.D kit. And also, as a quick little fun fact, each one of them is built with using the markings that are supplied with the kit. With the way the kit is, it is so versatile in that you could build a tank about at least 4 different ways with the out-of-the-box components without the extra need of any sort of aftermarket decals or other accessories. I mean, you can if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. And what you see here is the full spread. So we have, starting from right to left, we have a version built for the Deutsches Afrika Korps. The one right next to it is the star of this video, the one that got restored. And then we have 2 other versions, but either way, you really get to see just how versatile this old kit really is. Also, this video is a bit of a send-off, if you will, because this kit does show its age. I'm not sure how much longer this kit is going to be in production, if it's still in production, but like I mentioned before, since there are so many of these kits that were produced over the years, tracking one down is ridiculously easy, and they're actually quite affordable when found. However, it doesn't hurt to have a nice little spread showing exactly what you can do with the base starter kit. It also goes to show you that even though a kit may have some years on it with its original tooling, and the kit may also have several inaccuracies with it, which these kits definitely do, that doesn't mean they should be just written off entirely. At the end of the day, it just depends on a nicely built model with a nice paint finish. If your paintwork and weathering work is on point, you'll be surprised just how good one of these older kits really can turn out. And if you have one of these older kits built to a nice condition, with your other more super modern accurate kits in your collection, the 2 will actually complement each other quite nicely. And believe it or not, that's something that a lot of people out there don't really think about when they're fleshing out their collection. But hopefully after seeing this one over here, perhaps you may want to reconsider that type of a mindset. With the 3 Panzer Gray variants placed here on the table, hopefully it comes out in this lighting here, but you can see a clear difference between the 3 paint schemes and weathering options that were applied to each of these models. So starting with the one here, the start of the show, this one here, as we can recall, is just standard Tamiya Panzer Gray, and I just went over the edges with the darker shades in order to get the color that you see here. While on the other 2 examples, they have some lightning agents on them to give them a more sun-faded look. So the one here in the middle is, I believe, also Tamiya Panzer Gray, but this one here has a wash of a cream color onto the surfaces, along with the other weathering techniques that were mentioned in this video. And then the one here on the very end, it's the same colors, but white was utilized. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the base coat on this one may have been exterior latex as opposed to the Tamiya, but I'm a little hazy on that. It's been a while since I actually watched the videos. But either way, you could see a clear difference between the 3 color schemes. And again, even though all 3 are Panzer Gray, the 2 are, or I should say no 2 are basically alike. If I go ahead and pivot these around, hopefully you get to see in better light the gradation happening with the color schemes. It really does illustrate that if you just change 1 or 2 different techniques out, maybe change a color or mid one altogether, you can go ahead and change the look of the model without having the paint scheme be drastically changed altogether. And it's something potentially to play around with. And in the end, there's nothing much more I could have wanted out of the end result that I didn't get with this project over here. This is a nearly perfect build, and specifically since the way we saw the way the model looked like at the project start, it's definitely an improvement in every single regard. And although this model didn't need nearly as much work compared to some of the other models that I've done the OTR treatment to found on this channel in the past, this one still required a little bit of TLC in order to get it cleaned up to the way we see it here. This essentially was more or less just a nice polished job. However, at the end of the day, the thing still came out to be a perfect example of what a rebuild can be. As we saw before, the proof is most certainly in the pudding. When I had this model here aligned with the other ones that were newly, freshly built kits, this one here blended in absolutely perfectly, and unless anyone saw this video, no one in a million years would have possibly have guessed that this one here was a rebuild. As I've mentioned on several other of these videos in the past, plastic models are very durable and are far more adaptable than a lot of people give them credit for. And a lot of people have this misconceived notion that plastic models are a type of thing where it's a one-shot deal, where if you build it and you don't build it right the first time, it's just toast. And that couldn't be any further from the truth. As we saw from this video and all the other examples found in the OTR lineup, with a little bit of love and a little bit of technique, you can take something that was a complete mess and turn it into something that's going to be a bright, shining piece in your collection. Hopefully after watching this video, you got some inspiration to perhaps take a second look at your collection. Maybe you have a build that wasn't really built all that great the first time, or was a bit neglected, sitting around collecting dust, or potentially got broken at some point in the past. But rather than going ahead and having it languish away in that condition, perhaps you may have some inspiration to go ahead and take it and give it a nice little polish job. Who knows, perhaps it'll come out better the second time around. And if you watch this video and the other ones in the OTR lineup, also, you may have learned some new techniques that will better assist you in your endeavor. No more will this model be kept in the corner of a dusty book cabinet in the enclave of the shop being used to grow penicillin. Nope, from now on, this one is going to be kept in a nice, beautiful, clear plastic display case that's dust-proof, and it's going to be placed in the new display area where it has ample light and will be clearly visible on display with its relatives for the rest of time. And when it comes to happy endings, well, it don't get much more happier than that. That's like straight out of Disney. I had an absolute blast while doing the restoration here, and again, it always feels good to finish a restoration because it's almost like you corrected a mistake that was done many years ago, and redemption arcs are always the best. And I'm pretty confident I was able to appease the Panzer of the Lake until she sees the next vehicle that I have to do an OTR on, but that's neither here nor there. And with that, that wraps up this episode of Old Tank Repair. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being other old tank repair videos like this one over here, or the other type of content being small scale model showcase videos and larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular model, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.